And for the first time ever, that sounds like a great. For the first time ever, I believe in the history of mankind, Robert, man and machine will become one, and they will try to commentate. Human beings will try to commentate on the greatness of computer chess today on Chess.com. Are you excited, confused? Give everybody the plethora of emotions that you are clearly feeling right now.
Well, I'm definitely excited, but I'm also a bit concerned that we're going to make absolute fools of ourselves because, we're used to commentating on human games, and engines are a whole different animal. I mean, they're just quite literally not human. They see much more than we do. So it will be fun. I'll get to ridicule you a bunch, and, well, you'll take your jabs at me as well.
Yeah, well, I fully, the difference between us is that I fully expect and regularly do make blunders. You're supposed to be the chess smart guy in our shows when we're covering things like Magnus Carlsen and Wesley So, which is coming up this week, and you and I will have the call on Magnus Carlsen or whoever wins that match and Sasha Grishik. So much going on in regards to the world of top human level chess. But today we are here to comment on the Computer Chess Championship. So while this game is just kicking off, let's remind the fans a little bit about what they're here to see. You can see that Fire and Fizbo are officially going at it. Robert, the tournament brings together the 10 strongest chess engines in the world. Now, when I say that, what engine names come to mind for you, right? The fact that there are even 10 of them is already probably a little mind-blowing for people when really only a few of them are really well-known. So what are your thoughts when I say the 10 strongest engines in the world are here to play?
Well, definitely Komodo, Houdini, and Stockfish are the top of everyone's radar. I mean, they're the privately commercialized engines. They are generally the top three in the rankings of computer chess, but that doesn't mean that they're invincible. In fact, there are other strong engines in this competition. We see the game between Fire and Fizbo, the two games I should say, are just got underway. Both are very strong engines, capable of competing with the likes of Komodo and Houdini. So, and Skax is becoming more popular. There's some, honestly, I hadn't even really heard of, but it's exciting to see that more minds are being put in to machine learning and improving engine play.
Absolutely, and so people can see the 10 participants right there as we bounce back and forth to showing you the first game that's underway. And again, one interesting fact and why we're taking this moment to kind of talk a little bit generally about this event is the opening's just getting started, but also the computers today, everyone submitted their engines and optimized them for our event, which is a 15-minute plus 2-second time control, similar to the Pro Chess League, Robert. But also, our server has also removed the opening book from these engines. Now, that's important, I think, because it means that maybe some of those further developed engines, the big guns you talked about, Komodo, Houdini, Stockfish, Shredder, those guys, I think that making it even less of a let's say the team behind the engine making them better, right? We made a faster time control. Everyone's being played from the same strength server, our own servers, which we use Amazon servers. And there's no openings book, so there's no theoretical pressure on maybe some of the developers to update their opening book for Gaul or something like that. Now, with that, I'm saying that as you and I are looking at one game here where there's actually a French being played on the board, right? An exchange French, which apparently is what Fizbo thinks White should be doing without an opening book. Thoughts on that?
Well, it's kind of hilarious because at the upper echelons of human play, the exchange French is generally seen as, I wouldn't say go as far as dubious, but it's not seen as very challenging. So, in fact, oftentimes it's seen to give Black a comfortable road to equality. So that's already the first bizarre thing we've seen. Well, they don't have the opening book in front of them, so they're playing what they feel, I guess, are objectively best moves. But Danny, I mean, you know as well as I do that it's not the most threatening opening to play with the white pieces.
Absolutely, and part of the reason for that, everybody, is at some point here we're going to say Black gets castled and White will do the same. And usually in a structure like this with only one open file and everybody sort of wrestling for the same squares, you get a gridlock, right? It's not exactly the most dynamic opposite side castles kind of game. So that's kind of what Robert's touching on there. So great point, partner, and it will be interesting to see what happens here. As okay, now Fire doesn't play castle. He can place queen e7 check immediately. we're going to come back to that and see what's happening as maybe the fire on the board is about to kick off. Hashtag first shear-off reference of the day. But let's, before we do, Robert, we talked about the 10 participants here. Remind them one more time what they're playing for. This is our first ever event we've held. We've got $2,500 in prizes up, which for a lot of these developers who are just volunteering their time, it's some fun cash to win. And we are going to be giving back to all those great minds investing in the future of machine learning and chess. And we hope that this event grows and maybe much bigger prizes to come. So, okay, that's our rundown of what you're watching here today, folks. And now let's talk about what we're seeing with Queen E7 check and then castles, Robert.
Yeah, this is pretty standard play in this game where fire is the black pieces. But, in the other game, things are very weird with fire with white. I'm not sure I've actually ever seen this opening. We could already be in novel territory. We saw Queen's Gambit declined as the setup. But, the fourth move, pawn takes c4. And then e3. I mean, this is kind of a more solid setup. I feel like usually there are moves with eventually going e4, starting with knight f3. But yeah, I mean, this kind of setup is already looking kind of strange to me, Danny. I don't know about you if you've ever seen something like this, but I think that with the two bishops in the long run, black will be doing well. But in the meantime, that the majority from the e to the h files looks good for white.
Yeah, I'm analyzing the game here as you're talking, and white does do this voluntary capture on f6, and interesting to see fire evaluate the bishop pair being traded is totally worth white making this d5 break to open up the center against black's king. Knight takes d5, invited queen takes b2, but I guess knight to c7 check would have been too much, so the queen comes back to d8 and bishop takes c4. All right, so you're saying the black bishops will maybe tell the tale if this game goes on, but as far as the evaluation right now and in what our own Stockfish cloud server, which is the engine bar you see there directly to the left of the board you're watching, everybody, and the moves being suggested is from Stockfish, who I think it's fair that we have Stockfish evaluating other engines, given that probably Stockfish and Komodo might be the main two that you would deem to be qualified to do so, right? Given that they're probably everybody's favorites to win an event like this. But Stockfish likes white here, despite black's bishop pair long term. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it makes sense. For the time being, at least, white is ahead in development. Castling comes easily. And then white can actually just coordinate the rooks, use some open files, and play from there. In general, the queen on d8 can become victim to a rook swing to d1. And the knight on d5 is a very powerful piece. So I do agree that white is slightly better. I would prefer to have white in this position. But I can also see black catching up in development, and from there trying to utilize those two bishops.
For anybody just tuning in, again, this is the Chess.com Computer Chess Championship. All of these engines are battling each other for supremacy and a rapid time control, 15 minutes with a 2-second increment. But we cannot show the clocks right now because the server that these clocks are being relayed from does not include the game time. But we can assure you we are measuring the clocks, and as you see these computers play faster with time going by, that's because they are under time pressure. But unfortunately for this event, we were not able to get, given the routing server we were using, hashtag excuses, but let's just say that we will be keeping you up to date, especially as the games go on longer. But the time control is 15 minutes with a 2-second increment, even though you can't see the time control. So, okay, the Shredder match against Ann Sachs is also just getting underway, Robert, while the action is kind of heating up. I think we got to talk about this one here, where Fizbo just grabbed this pawn on b7, and notice that Fizbo deems it worthy to take, but what does our own Stockfish say? It says black is better here after a couple moves here, despite the fact that white just won a pawn. What's the line that Stockfish is seeing after rook b8 and queen takes c6, do you think?
Well, I think the fact that black is actually going to become quite far ahead in development. So rook b6 was indeed played, forcing the queen over to a4, and the b2 pawn will fall. White lacks development and coordination, and black is seeing the engine here, fire 6.2, is seeing that despite a pawn disadvantage and perhaps even going down a second pawn, that white will have a great difficulty coordinating the pieces, and thus the activity is more than ample compensation for the sacrifice material.
Yeah, and as we see, white is still up one pawn, but Stockfish still is liking the position leaning toward black, as is Fire, probably because Fire went for it. Right now, we talked about the 10 engines that are gathering here. Let's talk a little bit about that again, Robert, because the ranking systems, I think that most people would say that we go through, if we're starting, we're going backwards to the top. I think Ansax is one of the newer engines on the scene, not highly ranked or favored to win the event. I think Boot and Chiron, which we're going to see play here, all in the day one schedule, are right there along with Ansax as far as strength goes. This is just the general, I think, how most people feel. But it really isn't until you get past Fizbo where you start to have, I think, the discussion of more recognizable names. I think Fire is definitely favored in this match versus Fizbo. But after the big four, Stockfish, Komodo, Houdini, and Shredder, we probably put Ghul right there in the top 5 alongside Fire. I'm interested to see the Fire-Ghul match when that happens. But, okay, reminding everybody, we have Shredder, Houdini, and then, of course, right there at the top, Komodo and Stockfish. So I'm just pointing out that it's an interesting angle precisely because we're seeing these engines make decisions that are different, right? I mean, Fizbo decided to go for that pawn, but both Stockfish and Fire are loving Black's chances here despite White having this extra C3 pawn because Black's Rook is on the second rank and Black just has much better coordination.
Yeah, absolutely. And the position that Fire has with the black pieces reminds me of something that a player like Levana Ronian would love with the black side, because a lot of activity, despite the fact you're down a pawn for the time being, and it just feels like one of those positions where you can seize the initiative quickly, and from there you can perhaps win your material back. And we see Queen takes C3 in that game, so material equality is restored, and Black has a very harmonious piece play.
All right, well, let's go up to the other game that we left a little bit ago, but back up and see exactly where we did it, maybe just for a quick second after White made that D5 break and had the greater activity despite Black having the bishop pair. We see Fire kind of looks like getting the initiative here with the obstacle bishops and willing to not castle to launch this amazing attack here on the king side. It's really, I mean, again, we're pretending to be caught up with these guys. Even the weakest engine in this group is probably coming in ranked, what, like 3,100 or something? So they're a little higher rated than you, Robert. No offense.
You're selling these engines short. They're a lot higher rated than I am, and a lot stronger than I am. But, I mean, this is just actual crazy play. I feel like I'm watching a Hikaru Nakamura bullet game in this one because White is not castled. The king's on F1, but there's also no way to really attack it because the knight on F3 clearly blockades the rook on F8. The queen on A2 is a nuisance, hitting the rook on B1 and putting a little bit of pressure on the F2 square. But at the same time, White's pieces can quickly flood into the action. Rook H7 at some point is going to be very difficult to meet. The E6 pawn is hanging. The G6 pawn is hanging. So, from that perspective, from the human perspective, I feel like the White is actually doing extremely well. And it seems that the Stockfish evaluation backs that up.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk about the matches that just started. As we said, Deep Shredder and Ansax are underway. Remind you, everybody, that we are going to have so many games being played as our server relays all of these engines who have been tweaked. As a reminder of the format, we reached out to all of the developers behind these amazing engine tools and asked them to submit their own optimized version for our time control and for our server relay without opening book. So I believe, and maybe my assistant here, Pete, if you can confirm, I think every single one of them submitted an optimized version. I could be wrong, but I think every single one did. So we're not going to be able to follow every game. Robert and I are here to entertain you and to try to educate you as we all learn from these amazing engines. But as a reminder, if you go to chess.com/live or look for some direct links right below the Chess TV player, you should be able to log in. Under the events tab, you will find all of the games. Here now I'm opening up the second matchup that's going between Deep Shredder and Ansax. And just getting underway is one of our first of the privately owned engines and of really the big three, and that is Houdini getting underway, Robert, against Chiron as our next match has started. We're seeing another French. What is it about the French, huh?
Yeah, it's actually really bothering me to see this many French because at that higher GM levels, you really don't see the French being essayed that frequently. So it must be without their opening books, right? We've seen some exchange Frenches already.
Right.
But this just might be the computer-backed opening system. That being said, I don't think we're going to see kind of a renaissance of French games. Maybe MVL is going to see these and say, well, I'm the #1 Frenchman in the world. Let me go for it. But realistically, it's just without the opening book, they're just making moves.
Yep. Well, since Houdini has started, I think it's a good moment to talk a little bit about one of the most exciting events that's going on right now is also the TCEC, which, Robert, get this, right? These TCEC games, which are just computers playing, no commentary, just amazing to watch these engines go at it when everyone can see their evaluations and their opinions as they change, is averaging somewhere between 700 and 1,000 viewers on their Twitch channel of people just tuning in to watch these games. I've been fascinated by the interest in the TCEC, and today there was some... Is it fair to say controversy? Some really interesting stuff, Robert. Talk a little bit about what happened in this screen that I'm showing the fans, where Houdini and Komodo went at it today, and they didn't really agree on what was going on in the game, which is fascinating.
Yeah, this is actually really interesting to see from a human perspective, because a lot of players think that engines are infallible, but that's just not the case. We see that in the position on the screen there, and with the two rooks, queen each, that Black's king is really lacking shelter. And in fact, Black thought the position was all right, but as the evaluation showed from White's point of view, in fact, it saw a clear-cut win. I believe the evaluation was up to 250, whereas Black said something like 0.13, or something very small. So a misevaluation by Black causes a defeat.
Yeah, it was amazing. And again, it's just because people think, why are we doing this, right? All these engines think the same, but clearly not, right? Even at the highest level of those three top engines. And the world was a bit abuzz about it. There were some tweets about it. Nacho Soto, a big fan of the computer chess TCEC, and I were kind of going back and forth about it. So for those who are wondering, go ahead and head over to social media and check out some of those moments and let us know. But okay, so let's head over here to the matches between Fire and Fizbo. We've got the two games going right now. The one with the evaluation that we can see is the French game, I believe. Oh, no, the one that the main one we can see where Fire is white is that game with that interesting bishop pair being given up early, and it looks like Fire is about to take this one home. Robert, he's all over it. And the second game we can see that happened in the French. We also, I think, like Fire's position, but that's a little bit stranger when we've got this passed A pawn on A2 there on the smaller board. So what are your thoughts about these two games as Fire and Fizbo go at it?
Well, Fire with the white pieces is putting Black under fire. I mean, look at this rook on G8. The bishop on G7 is pinned because that rook is not protected. The rook on E7 is also unprotected, which means the bishop can't move for multiple reasons. And so we just see the move queen to E4 played by Fire, and he's putting more pressure on the B7 square. White's pieces are very well placed, and Black is all sorts of discombobulated. I think that this should be a fairly straightforward win from White's perspective, though. With these engines, they're resourceful defenders. Perhaps there's some way to hold, but I'm not seeing it.
Absolutely, I agree. And just Stockfish, our main engine evaluator, is also favoring White right now. We can see from the eval bars going somewhere between +1 to about +1.5 as far as Stockfish's opinion on who's better. Now this other game, we'll bring it up on both boards here. This other game with this passed A pawn now for White and this D pawn coming under fire by Fizbo. I feel like Fizbo has gotten himself out of the worst in this one. I don't know that White really has any real winning chances, but I don't think that Fizbo's going to lose this one. What do you think?
I think that optically, as humans, we see an outside pass pawn, the A pawn, and think that White should be better. But in fact, Black is slightly to be preferred. I'm not looking at the engine evaluation right now, but just from my point of view, that there can be some pressure on the F2 square. So the fact that White will have to maintain the king side, despite having this outside pass pawn, it feels like if Black can organize its pieces, an engine doesn't have any gender, its pieces in a well-coordinated way to hit the king side, that White can be susceptible to a little bit of an issue on that side of the board. But I really think the game should fizzle out into a draw.
Okay. Well, I mean, it's I'm glad you were the first one who brought up the lack of gender issue about the computers, because I was gonna dive into that as soon as we're able to. But all right, no. What do we have here? So let's keep that second board in the rear view there, and let's go back to game one. Fire and Fizbo was our first match. Again, everybody, you can head over to the Chess.com live server. Just click on the binoculars. That is our events tab, and watch any of the computer games you want as Robert and I are going to kind of go with the flow and cover what we see. So let's talk about, oh, wow, this nice move G4. I guess just going for G5 and G6, and we continue to see these rooks on F7 and E8 not being well coordinated for black. So what would the plan be here if we're providing some education for our members if you were converting this win as white, if you were fire?
Well, I would say that a lot of people think, oh, this is not a human move, pushing a pawn in front of the king. But I actually think that most grandmasters would find this move because the king is in no danger whatsoever. So pushing a passed pawn up the board while hitting a rook on F7 seems like a wise idea. That being said, that's really just the plan. Is pushing that G pawn forward, going King G2, perhaps swinging the other rook to H1 if you'd like at the right moment, eventually going Knight H5 to hit the bishop on G7. And I don't really see what black can do at all because black's queenside pawns cannot get moving. Otherwise, the king is just going to be in grave danger. So it looks like black is pretty much stuck and white can just continue making progress unopposed.
We're going to stay on this game because it is definitely the most exciting of the two here between Fire and Fizbo in day one. But we can see on the other board there, fans, that's the other game in this match with Fizbo having the white pieces, but looks like we are going to have a game that peters out to a draw. Though if I had to choose in that rook ending, I'd probably choose black with the healthier structure despite the outside passed a pawn. But fair to say that one's going to be a draw, partner, with the rook ending?
Yeah, 100% will be a draw. I mean, I agree with you that practically speaking, black has slightly better winning chances, but with that outside pass pawn, there's no way to really make progress.
Okay. All right, well, let's see. We now have the queen.
All 10 games are underway, Danny. It feels like we have a lot to handle here, but every single match has begun.
Yep, Komodo has just started against Gaul. So we got bigger names coming out. Komodo is in there against Gaul, and then we've got the last but not least Stockfish taking on Boot. Boot with a whole bunch of O's, like as many consonants as a Slavic middle name, Robert. Except this time it's O's. So.
I feel like it's like a Canadian engine, what are you talking about?
Talking about Boot. That's actually a great thing, because I was going to say Boot might be trying to show Stockfish his O face, but we're going to get back to that later. All right, let's talk about the game between Fire and Fizbo now, where White offered the queen trade. Fizbo didn't take it. The G6 pawn has been blockaded. So how does White make progress now? You said these engines are super resourceful, and I think that's one of the hallmarks or the calling cards of engines when humans practice against them. Like I've done training, Robert, where I play an opening I know well, or even giving myself like a winning position, right? Like from our drills section or something. And one thing that you always notice in those formats is even when you think you're better in winning and a human player would be crumbling, the engines are always defending those positions, at the very least making them as difficult as possible, if not actually holding a draw on a lost endgame against a human.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've also done some training playing engines. It's just like, it's very frustrating when you don't look at the evaluation for a bit and feel like you're making the right plan. You flip the engine back on, and all of a sudden, there's this resource that your advantage has evaporated. So
this move, Queen D7, is a good example of that. Everybody, black is trying to bait white into trading and then winning a piece on G7, because at the end of that line, black would have rook takes G6, forking the king and knight. So we obviously doubt that Fire would go for that. Of course he doesn't. He plays the move Queen E4, but note that is once again the engine finding a resourceful way to deal with what was a double attack by the white knight on H5. But probably not going to be enough to save Fizbo in this one. Looks like Fizbo's likely going down here. This is getting tougher.
I really love the name Fizbo. I don't know why. It feels like...
I think it sounds like Gizmo, like from the Gremlins or something. I don't know.
Yeah, that could be it. I thought it sounded more like the person that gets bullied in every like high school movie you ever see.
But is the underdog, right? Who in the end gets the girl, and you find out he's, everything, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, there's so many games going, everybody. We're going to switch to other matches here in just a moment. Remind you that Stockfish is underway. Here is his game as white against a boot. Here's Stockfish as black. Now, these are some openings. Here we got some Queen's Indian stuff. That's interesting. Ghul is taken on Komodo, which I'm interested in. Ghul has been one of the the new kids on the block as far as open source engines. I mean, Stockfish is the cream of the crop in all ways, really open source chess, almost anything, chess software, really. Stockfish is the leading innovator and has so many people contributing to its improvements. But Ghul has really burst on the scene, Robert, and is kind of making waves as having a bright future in this industry.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, the Gaul game with the white pieces against Komodo here is one that I really like for white, because if you look at the structure, the setup here, it looks like black's light squares have been softened up. I mean, the pawn on f6 weakens the e6 square, and the knight on d4 is extremely well placed. Black is stuck with an isolated d pawn, and so from my vantage point here, I really love what Gaul is doing on the white side of this Alpine Sicilian.
I agree totally, and so does Stockfish. Stockfish may be a little biased against his arch nemesis Komodo, just kidding. But no, I mean, Stockfish also likes white by more than half a point, and I agree. I think the reasons from a human perspective are easy for us to understand and provide some educational analysis. It's mainly because of everything Robert just said. It's because of this weak d5 pawn and the weak light squares that go with it, that you have to like white's positional chances here. I guess the one thing that white lacks is direct pressure against the d5 pawn. Humans would consider ways to maybe try to relocate their pieces, things like rook e1. Even bringing this bishop on d3 back to f1 is possible at some point to open up the queen and put pressure there. I expect we'll see, but okay, the Stockfish is suggesting the bishop come back to c2, and maybe that's because keeping the bishop on this diagonal here, focused on the weak, potential weak light squares on the king side, is where white should keep that bishop. What are your thoughts about what the plan would be? What would the middle game strategy be here, as we see Ghul indeed went for bishop to c2 and now a4?
Well, one very important thing I'll say is that humans really hate passive shuffling. We are extremely bad at just sitting back and saying, "Come get me" to our opponents. Engines, on the other hand, they don't have feelings, so they're just making what they see as the optimal moves. So even though I love white's position and think that this queenside expansion, potentially going forward with a4 to a5, you're going to have, I was about to say, the move was played, queen e2, then put a rook on d1, maybe decide where to put this dark square bishop, maybe to f4, or to just sit. Actually, you can just keep it on c1 because there is not really a great square for it yet. But the point at large is, even though white has all these clear advantages, the principles of chess, you're fighting against an isolated pawn, there's some weakened light squares, etc. If black is able to just shuffle the pieces and white is not able to make progress, well, that's just something that computers are so excellent at doing. So at some point, I expect some more pressure to develop on the e file, but I think black is also doing well to swing the queen to f7, bring a rook to e8, and challenge white in the center of the board.
Okay. Well, we'll see what happens. I see some of the questions in the chat are asking who all is playing who. Again, you can go to the Chess.com live server and check that out. But this is the schedule for day one right in front of you right now. These are the matchups that we will be covering today. As you see, we've already spent most of our time talking about Fizbo and Fire. Houdini and Chiron are underway. Maybe we'll switch over and talk a little bit about that matchup, if that's okay with you, Robert. Let's head over here. So here we see one of the games between Houdini and Chiron, and here's the other one. So on our big board, we have the game that is further along. We're headed into an end game where Chiron is holding his own against the great Houdini, who's supposed to be one of the top three in the world here, right? I expect Chiron to hold his own as white. However, as black, it looks like Houdini is better in that game with the bishop on h3 hitting the pawn on e6 and black in a little bit of trouble here. So let's talk a little bit about this matchup between Houdini and Chiron.
Yeah, absolutely. In that first game with the opposite colored bishops, I presume this game will be a very simple draw. I mean, the story there is just opposite colored bishops, not many remaining pieces. And, we just see the move bishop f3 played. I think the problem with bishop takes a6 in that last position was rook to b8, traps that bishop on a6, and rook b6 would be a pretty deadly threat. So instead, the bishop retreats to f3. We have an even endgame, opposite colored bishops, same number of pawns, and thus that game should be relatively straightforward in terms of a draw. And the other game, Denny, what you said is absolutely right. The bishop on h3 really pressurizes that pawn on e6, and behind it, the bishop on d7 is a very passive piece, and that's the most important thing here, is that white has active pieces. The knight on f3 can hop into e5, where the knight on c6 is really just sitting there defending the e5 square, and the bishop on h3 is applying pressure, whereas the bishop on d7 is just meeting that pressure. So white's activity is really what leads Houdini ahead in this game. But at the same time, this rook h6 and kind of maybe rook g6, rook h6 swinging back and forth over on the king side might be able to keep black in the game, especially if some initiative can develop on the d4 square and potentially on the c file.
Yeah, that's a great point there. That would be black's plan. Of course, we see another French defense, but yeah. So black playing a little bit of tickle with the bishop there on the king side, but really, if black's going to get counterplay, it's going to be on the d4 pawn, perhaps opening the c file. Maybe a knight comes into b4. You start to get access into some of these squares here, but. Overall, okay, I mean, I agree that, as we said already, the first game is just headed toward a draw. These engines don't take draws. Like you said, they're not human beings. They don't get tired. They don't just decide to call it quits. They're going to play this game out probably for 197 moves or something. But even the second game here, I feel like Chiron is worse, yes, because of the e6 pawn, but it's not really a huge edge for white at this point.
Danny, I don't mean to cut you off, but we did see a draw in the game where Fizbo was white against fire. We had predicted that draw. I think it's important to remind the viewers the time control is 15 minutes with 2-second increment each side, which means that now that it's half past, that this game is actually, they must be in time trouble. And we don't have the clocks up there being hosted separately, right, on Amazon. Is that correct, Danny?
That's right, yeah.
But they are in time trouble, and that first game was ended in a draw, and fire with the white pieces is moving very quickly, but is also up a knight, so that game should result in a win in the very near future.
Yeah, so there we saw that rook ending. Everyone, you can see that small board there that we're keeping an eye on is that, I guess, the more dynamic, interesting battle going on between Houdini and Chiron. So if you liked that we were talking about that game, just keep your eye on that one. But Robert and I are going to focus now on this fire versus Fizbo, where fire's up a piece. The valuation is creeping slowly, more and more in the direction of that white bar on the left side of our board taking over, meaning white's getting closer to winning. There doesn't seem to be anything left here, right, for Fizbo, but a bowl full of jelly, a few random spite checks. Computers, one thing they are better than humans at is playing spite checks, right? Spite checks.
Absolutely, and that's one of your favorite things, the spite check.
One of my favorite things when I'm about to lose is a spite check. No, not really. But okay, we're going to call this first match here between Fizbo and Fire a 1.5 to a half win. Likely, we'll update you, of course, if we somehow, some way are shockingly wrong. But the schedule there, so if that matchup turns out to be a win for Fire, as we think it will be, then we'll have a 1.5 to a half victory from Fire for the first day. So what matchup should we move to next here, Robert, of all the ones we see on the screen?
Too many good ones to look at. I think the Shredder and Skak's match is a good one. We're in a bunch of end games here. The one where Shredder is white is looking very interesting, this Rook Ending, where the rook is sitting on b6, protected by pawn a5, but both sides are about to create some passed pawns, and the structure is hideous. I mean, there are tons of double pawns in this game, but at first glance here, I mean, I'm having trouble even counting the number of pawns. It looks like black has 5 and white also has 5, it looks to me like, I mean, I would have to guess it's about level, just based on the ridiculous pawn structure. And it's important to note that black's king is trapped on f5, which means that something went really wrong. There could be a zugzwang that resulted in defeat. But now, this rook b1 move.
With this rook c2 move, white's inviting the trade, mainly on this factor, everybody, that, of course, the a7 pawn or the a pawn will not be stoppable. So after a move like rook c2, of course, black didn't make that trade. But is there any way white can force anything here? Because without being able to force the rook trade in the king and pawn ending where that a pawn is winning, white may have nothing better than just a repetition, because with this move rook b1, Robert, isn't Ansak's threatening a move like rook to h1 to go get the h pawn? Is that the problem? Or I guess the real threat is rook a1, just coming behind the a pawn and gobbling that guy.
Exactly, and they're repeating the move, so it just should be a draw agreed. But the issue is that the rook b1, rook a2, well, black just has b3, and that pawn is black's pawn is ahead in that race. So you have to be careful in an endgame like this. But it looks like they're repeating moves, and the game should just be a draw. So in fact, it is a draw. The result is marked there. So 50-50 in that game.
So. But that's kind of an upset here because, well, I guess not. No, I mean, Deep Shredder is really the favorite in this matchup, I think, against Ansak's, but with Deep Shredder and the white pieces not able to get anything. I mean, we're going to talk about this other game here, but that game is also likely headed to a draw. Maybe I'm wrong in my view that Shredder in my mind was favored over Ansak's. I guess it might just be the household name thing, right? When you know a name like Shredder better than Ansak's, you think that. But Ansak's is like Ghul in the sense that it's really burst onto the scene and been one of the more popular kind of growing engines as far as people that its downloads and use by people.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to go ahead and mark a result, that game Fire did beat Fizbo, so that is official.
Okay.
And so that was a 1.5 in favor of Fire. But let's go to Komodo versus Gaul. This is actually very interesting. Both are in some really kind of complicated middle games, and not complicated in terms of who is better, but there's so many pieces on the board. So Komodo with white against Gaul, this is what you call a really dominating position. Look at that knight on e4, Danny. That is a unicorn. That is a beautiful piece. That bishop on e7, again, I've talked about this earlier, it's passive piece versus very active piece. That bishop on e7 really does nothing but say, okay, I'm going to wait for your knight to infiltrate, and then I'll try to eventually hack at it. Mm-hmm. But for the moment, that knight on e4 is just, is the best piece on the board. In fact, at some point, white wants to go rook d6, and then just black is totally stuck there. So it's a really awful position to have with the black pieces. It's just, I think it's practically speaking game over.
I love Komodo's chances in both games as well. I agree, and there is this sort of similar theme that if we look at both boards, we have a knight on e4 when Komodo's white and a knight on e4 when Komodo's black. And you and I have talked about this with Komodo in the sense that it seems of all the engines in the world, even in comparison to Stockfish and Houdini, and you can tell me if you agree with this, Komodo seems to maneuver more like the strongest grandmasters, we'll say Magnus Carlsen, than like any other engine, right? Komodo's ability to always seem to have more well-coordinated plans and pieces, I feel like is just second to none. And all the matches we've done, we also have learned, I think, Komodo's personality, if it's fair to say it has a personality, probably better than any others because of the man versus machine matches that we hold on Chess.com. But I'm just not surprised to see Komodo just dominating Ghul positionally with two good knights, both as white and black.
Absolutely, but something that I would say that I could not really foresee humans doing is in the game where Komodo was black here, just a couple moves ago, this move pawn to b5 was really caught me off guard because with that pawn on b7, I thought, okay, maybe white's idea is eventually to break on the queen side with b5 and try to get some play over there. But b5 from black was really, that surprised me. I'm almost astonished. I just would not really consider the move at all. So Komodo's still looking quite good with the knight on e4, but now I feel like Ghul's position is improving to an extent with this bishop on d4 spying on the g7 pawn. So a move like bishop takes e4 now is a pretty big threat. So
okay,
I don't know, very complicated position. Again, that this b5 move did very much surprise me, and the d4 square is entirely white's to take advantage of. And now this bishop g1 move is excellent because you need to keep that bishop on the d4 square, and knight to d4 will attempt to trade off those pieces and really cement that square for white to use in the future. So I really like white's position there. And again, with the quick time control, the engines are more likely to make mistakes. Inaccuracies grow as the computers have less time to think. So despite the fact that we all know and love Komodo and know how incredibly strong it is, with this short time control, with at some point going to be relying on a 2-second increment, things can really go downhill. Agreed.
And I think that's been one of the shortcomings of Komodo. I think that even the owners and software developers have been kind of clear about that the Komodo has been optimized for its strength as far as analysis for people that buy the engine and use it in their preparation, and also in longer time controls. Whereas I feel that Stockfish and some of the other engines, even Gaul, which is an open source engine, maybe are better at quote unquote blitz than Komodo. I still think Komodo is the favorite, probably against every other engine in this event besides Stockfish. But you make a great point about the time control, and maybe that's partly why Komodo misplayed that last position as black. Though looking at this one here as white, still feels like Komodo is in great control with this dominant knight on d6.
Yeah, and when we have a little bit more time, I think the Stockfish games are actually very interesting to show the viewers. So when we have, when after this round kind of settles down and maybe we have a couple minutes, I think the Stockfish games are actually very, very interesting because there are a lot of human elements that should be touched upon.
Mm-hmm.
But with this round still, very much underway, I think this Houdini game with white has just gotten ridiculously exciting with both kings looking a little iffy. I mean, look at that bishop on h7 for black. It looks terrible. But this move f4 is looking like a desperation attempt. But at the same time, I mean, who knows what's going on here? F4 is breaking open, or attempting to break open, I should say, the white king side. So, I mean, just a really hectic game. But it looks like white should be the first to break through, just because black's king safety is significantly worse. And now the pawn on b7 just fell as well.
Yeah. And even though that didn't necessarily increase the evaluation by much, it's still about +2 for Houdini. And with this knight losing protection, I think you said it right when you said that Chiron is kind of all in at this point with this f4 move and hoping to get a move like Queen e1. Everybody, I think Rook takes c6 might be met by Queen e1, which would allow a threat like Queen to g3. So maybe Houdini doesn't go for that. He plays Queen f6 check and is now probably just gonna work his way. Yeah, this is even more close to over, I think, now that Houdini is just gobbling up everything on the queen side.
And it's actually a pretty amazing, the Queen G5, if that, Stockfish, that was the only move that kept the advantage. All the moves immediately favored black. So, again, engines are great at finding only moves because they're engines and they're much better than us.
Right.
But sometimes we overlook these things in our games, and that can really prove costly. But, as you said, up so many pawns and now past D pawn, the knight on B5 is very strong to keep that pawn rolling. So
to highlight kind of the reason why Queen G5 was an only move there, sorry to cut you off, was just to kind of show that this move Queen E1 was still coming for black, and that was Chiron's idea with Queen E7, but it would have fallen to Queen F6 check, and then Bishop takes D5 check. So as Robert's saying, that sometimes it's not just that they're much better than us, but they're cool-headed, right? And even under time pressure, no emotion, right? So this move Queen G5, getting the queen back into the game, I think you're right. And like you said, yeah, now white is in total control. Having won the pawns, and the D pawn is probably going to have the last laugh here. So I don't know that do the engines resign in this format? I don't know, because at this point it's getting upwards of resignable territory here for Chiron.
Yeah, I would resign, but I don't control the engine, so that's their prerogative. But speaking of resignable positions, there are lots of them. I mean, Komodo is really just giving Ghul the business, honestly. I don't know how to put it any other way. Just not in very favorable territory for Ghul. And in one of the games, there is a passed pawn on c7, and Komodo is black.
That game we've still been following, so everyone can see that, and we'll bring it up on the big board here, everybody. The point is black can't take on c7 currently because of rook to c1, or he can because he just did, but what's the deal with that? Isn't he just going down a piece?
Well, there might be an issue for white, is that after rook takes c7, runs into b3.
Oh,
that's
wow.
actually an amazing tactic, and the pawn is not being stopped.
That is an amazing tactic. I just got to show that. Sorry, that you just go all in, and the both rook and the bishop would be powerless to stop the b pawn from queening. So sorry, go ahead. So what happened in the main game?
No, absolutely. It's a beautiful line that to find there. And now the rook is behind the pawn on b1. But after something like rook to c2 by black, and as was played, White's king can't get off the back rank, and the bishop can't move to e5 because rook c1 check, of course, wins the game if that bishop leaves a diagonal. So I don't see any way for White to make progress. And, if White's not careful, I guess there's some potential for Black to even get ahead in this one. But I think right now, because the king had to go to f5, now the bishop can go over to a3. Perhaps, is that... I don't know if it's...
I can't calculate this fast enough, but you're right. This has been a fascinating and very computer-ish solution to Black's problems, right? Who would sacrifice a piece to go into an endgame like this? This is like so difficult for humans to wrap their head around, that Black is actually in control and in total control of this game. I mean, this is...
Well, now what happens in this endgame? At some point, White is going to go bishop takes b2, and the rook endgame should probably be level. Rook d2. I wasn't expecting that, but bishop takes b2 check.
Then
I'm not really sure how. And rook takes b2, and then rook d6. Mm-hmm. I mean, White is the only one who can be better in this position. But I think the problem for White, I know the problem for White is that the king is cut off, and thus the Black king can just go king d3, king e3, and start making progress there, and or just starting with the checks.
I guess he's maybe going to go for a perpetual or play king d3 first.
Yeah, the engine has to, but that's why I want to start with king d3. I was just trying to keep the king cut off because I don't, really want to get into rook a2 check. Mm-hmm. The king comes to e3, and now it's not as easy. But okay, just king d3, and then king to e4 after rook d6 check, and you
should be a draw.
Yeah.
Wow, that was that's a one for the highlight reels as far as how engines approach things differently than humans. As they probably finish out that one to a draw, we'll leave it on our small board and pop back over to Komodo, who is finishing business against Ghul in the game where he did indeed have White. You'll tend to see that's a pattern, I think, in these matches where the favorite tends to win as White and draw as Black, because even being a much bigger favorite, all of these engines are just so darn strong that they almost never lose with White. I'll be curious to see at the end of this event, Robert, if we have, or how many, if any, decisive results we have where Black wins. I think we'll have very, very few, if any.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And actually, the game where Komodo just, that we have where Komodo is destroying Ghul, it was interesting because it stemmed actually from a piece sacrifice. If we go back to move 44, when White goes bishop to f7, the whole point was that it looks like White's hanging a piece after bishop takes d6 in that position, but bishop takes d6 doesn't actually win a piece. Well, I guess it does, but your whole king side is just completely shattered.
Yep.
After bishop takes d6, bishop takes g6 check. Well, your king is not exactly going to be a happy camper very shortly, because bishop g6 check, king g6, rook takes d6 with check. H5 is falling. There's just a direct line of just pretty much mating you. So.
Yep.
The king's not running away anywhere with the onslaught. So that was a nice way to, sew that win up. And in fact, checkmate is on the board, and Komodo wins the match 1.5-1/2. So you're right, Danny. It seems like a theme thus far. I wouldn't be surprised if that's how it remains for most of the matches, a 1.5-1/2 when there's a victor. But we did see Anskax and Shredder draw their match. So that was the one match that thus far has not been decisive.
Right. As all the matches you can see in front of you, everybody. Fire beat Fizbo in round one. Anskax and Shredder drew. Houdini has won with the white pieces against Chiron in the main game we'll go to now. Houdini mated very nicely with a couple of queens, so that's pretty sassy. But the game's still going in that match is this obstacle bishop one where, okay, it's going to be a draw, even though Chiron did manage to get himself in the driver's seat. But that's the theme we're going to see, right? Chiron, the weaker engine, or Houdini at least the favorite, and we're going to see Chiron hold with White but lose as Black.
Yep, and it's tough when you're going against Houdini, of course, one of the most widely recognized engines. But it was an interesting fight in that match for sure. Absolutely an interesting battle, and so I guess that leaves us with Stockfish and Triple O Boot.
That's right. Let's move on to that, as these guys kind of they're going to kind of play tickle it out there in that draw. But Stockfish is about to take care of business as white against boot. We'll see if Stockfish is the first of the favored engines to get a victory with both colors. He's going to win this one as white with a couple of rooks on the 7th rank and a bunch of pawns advancing. So let's leave that as it is and go to the position as black, where he actually has some chances to win here as black. And again, Stockfish would be the only favored engine to come up with a 2-0 score. This is instructive. How do you win a knight endgame like this, Robert?
Well, the key here is that the pawns are very far apart. So the H pawn will distract the king. The king will have to remain in this sort of F2 G1 area. Otherwise, the pawn just runs free to become a queen. And so realistically, there's no way to cover both at the same time, because a knight against a pawn is very bad, because knight has to situate itself in front of the pawn, but cannot simultaneously attack that pawn. And that's a very important point. Is whereas a rook, when it's sitting, there, it attacks the pawn by simply defending it.
Right.
The knight, on the other hand, really struggles against pawns because simply by the way it moves, and it doesn't have scope. Right. A bishop can cover a huge range and cover pawns on opposite sides of the board. A knight obviously cannot. So here, the knight is doing its best to try to attack, but if the knight has to sacrifice itself for the pawn, it's completely lost, because knight and pawn against king is an easy win, because then you can't actually remove the guard, because once you attack the knight, you still can't capture it because then the pawn roams free. So all in all, I think the engine is doing the best work. I mean, I'm just talking about it, but the engine is going to keep moving the king, eventually go h3, and should be straightforward from there.
Yeah, and note, everybody, there really is no threat for white to be able to give up the knight for this pawn. I think sometimes there's confusion. We know that a corner pawn is not the best pawn to win all endgames. Sometimes you can draw against a corner pawn against an extra bishop if it's the wrong color. But with except for one very rare draw where your king is actually trapped in front of the pawn, there's really no opportunity for white to give up this knight for the b pawn and then try to get that king to the h1 square, as that is not a drawable endgame, just a theoretical loss. So, so we see Stockfish play king g3. I think now h3 comes in. He's just sort of slowly methodic. Okay, b5, I guess he's overwhelming black with both pawns advancing at the same time. The risk of moving that pawn to b5, though, is now it's not protected by the knight. So if Boot can find some tricky way to get the king over there quickly before this knight on d7 can relocate itself to protect the pawn, maybe there's a chance to draw here. But maybe not. No, he's just going to get the pawn to b3 and then knight c5. Okay.
Yeah, and also knight e5 to f3 is a pretty good threat as well. So that would distract the knight from g1, and then the h pawn will be free to move forward. So I think really the major point is that even if the knight had sat on b5 and blockaded the pawn on b6, and even if white king was on h2, the problem is the knight is stuck over there blockading the pawn, and then the black knight could have just run into the king side and force the king back, and then the black king could have run over to the queen side and thus easily won that position as well. So now it's trivial. Up a knight and a passed pawn, it's game over. So
and this knight sort of serves the purpose, everybody, of like a protected passed pawn. It protects the pawn, but also it's not takeable. The king can never get to any sort of square that might attack that knight, because in doing so, you would be allowing this pawn to go get a queen. So white is just completely frozen here. The black king will come over, and eventually that b pawn will promote itself. So sorry, Robert, what were you going to say there?
No, I think actually your explanation is the knight serving as a passed pawn is a great one, because as you see with a protected passed pawn, you can't take the piece that is doing the protecting, because then the passed pawn ends up queening. So this is obviously straightforward. Now it's just simple. You're already at a point where you just go king c3, make sure you don't stalemate, and then push your.
It's funny how us humans think of that, right? Make sure you don't stalemate, and Stockfish, of course, has already calculated lines that lead to checkmate. And with that, we once again pop back over to round one of day one is now officially in the books, everybody. Stockfish being the only of the favored engines, that being Stockfish being favored over Boot, Komodo being favored over Gaul. Stockfish the only one to come away with a 2-0 result, Robert.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if that's a testament to Stockfish's strength, or perhaps, and I don't, I'm not very familiar with 000 Boot over here, but perhaps Boot might not be up to the task. I really don't know. That said, I wanted to highlight actually the Stockfish win with the white pieces. I think there's a great learning experience for viewers in the opening here. We saw it was a Tarrasch defense in the opening, and the main principles as we pull the board up with Stockfish's win with white is that in the opening, white is essentially going to almost forcing black to remain. Actually, black is forcing themselves to remain with the isolated pawn because the opening choice. But after pawn takes c5 on move 6, that this black went forward with a pawn sacrifice. So knight c6 was played, d takes c5, and then bishop takes c5 was the response. And we all know openings that are gambits. You give up material, hoping you get quick development and get enough compensation for the sacrifice material. But that actually did not come to fruition in this game because after queen takes d5, well, of course you don't want to trade queens because you've just given up a pawn. And you move queen e7, white continued with queen to e4, which makes a lot of sense, again offering the queen trade. And then after bishop e6, the move bishop to g5 was played. And we see that already black is in quite a bit of difficulty here because after bishop g5, if you go knight to f6, well, now you're putting yourself in a pin. So even if the queen just moves away, there's a pin there. You can also just capture on f6 and then continue your development. And the burden is overwhelmingly, on black to prove that you have enough compensation for that sacrifice pawn.
It's strange, right? So why did Boot go for this pawn sacrifice? Normally, well, not necessarily normally, but another option on move 6 for black is the move d4, which holds the pawn for the time being. And one of the common tactics that occurs in that line after like knight e4 is bishop takes c5, right? Followed by queen a5 check, regaining your material. So, I mean, I know this isn't necessarily the highest level line for black these days, but what's the theory on d takes c5? Is bishop takes c5 just bad, or was black already in one of those positions where without the opening book, Boot was, he didn't know what he was talking about. And Stockfish took it to him. So, I mean, what was the deal here? Where could he have improved?
I mean, knight f6 is definitely a reasonable move in this Tarrasch here. And the point is that if you are going to win this or try to win this d5 pawn, you might have to give up the bishop pair in the process.
Right, something like bishop, yeah.
For black.
Okay.
But also...
Is d4 a move instead of knight f6? Am I recalling correctly?
I think that in this particular position, there... I'm trying to think now. D4. I don't know.
Okay, interesting. Well, I feel like I've seen this line. I've seen this line happen here, where
I think. Sorry, you're right. D4 is the main move. I'm thinking. I'm trying to clear my. D4 is the main move here. And just like you said, of course, after d4, knight e4, bishop takes c5 is possible. You can probably go bishop f5. But I think after, in that position after d4, knight a4 is for some reason preferred. I'm not super familiar with the theory there.
Well, apparently neither was Boot as far as being super familiar with the theory. And remind everybody who may just be joining us a lot of things about this format. Let's do that because it's interesting, and there are some specific and sort of peculiar aspects to our format that might be different than the TCEC if you've tuned in to that computer tournament. So the participants you can see right in front of you. We invited 10 of what we deem to be the world's strongest engines in the world, and all of their developers have provided for us custom versions for the format that we're talking about here. The format is that the engines, it's a round robin in the preliminary rounds, but it's a short time control event, 15 minutes plus a 2-second increment, and all of the engines have had their opening books turned off from the server that we are relaying them from. So there is no advantages in terms of one side just has a slightly more accurate ECO that it's referencing. That's Encyclopedia of Chess Openings for those who don't speak chess nerd. And Robert, you speak chess nerd though. We both do. But there's no ECO, Robert, so that little analysis session we had there on the Tarrasch in the opening was instructive and kind of relevant, because I think it's part of the reason why Boot didn't get the right line there. He just didn't know what he was doing, you know. And again, so all these engines are together. They are competing in a 15-2 time control with no opening books. We are relaying all of them from an equal server. There are no advantages in regards to server speed. And they're all competing for some prize fund, just some cash that we threw up to make some donations to the top developers as far as funds that might be used to help them get better. The next round is about to get underway, but we have about probably 3 minutes to do that. Robert, let's throw on a little Be Right Back music and remind the fans that if they want to log in and see the games themselves, go to chess.com/live, and we'll be back in just a moment. Round two has begun. It has begun. Robert?
Yeah, and what a crazy first round we had. And remember that there are 2 games to every round, because the engines are playing each other with both white and black simultaneously.
That's right.
And that first round was some really fascinating games, a lot of head-scratching moves to me, and not in a bad way. I was just very impressed because, of course, these engines are much stronger than I am. They're much stronger than even Magnus Carlsen, but some really impressive games in the opening round, but also some curiosities, a lot of exchange Frenches, some Tarraches, more kind of calm openings that won't see that much at the elite level play. But again, the opening books are turned off, so it does make some sense for the engines to just go with what they see as being optimal.
Yeah, you make a great point, and I think a big part of that is exactly because of what you said about our format, just that we don't actually have the engines turned on for any of them. So, the ECOs turned on for any of the engines, and I think that's a big part of the reason why, as I attempt to get our next round set up here, everybody. All right. We've got the games already underway here. You see both on your screen. Chiron and Boot are going at it. Those are the only games that have started in round 2. Remind you of the round 2 schedule, everybody. This is what it is. Boot and Chiron kick things off. Shredder and Fire are next. That's an interesting match. I'm going to say that I think Fire is the favorite against Shredder, and that, I don't know, that's to me that's also like a 50-50, and I feel like that's partly because Shredder, as we saw, it was the only sort of favorite to not get a win. The match was tied in round 1 as Shredder drew Ansax. I don't know what's the fair thing to say, if Shredder's sort of engine has slipped, or if if the other developers are catching up with Shredder. But I think that Fire is probably the favorite against Shredder.
Yeah, Fire was very impressive against Fizbo, but I don't know if that says more about Fire or about Fizbo maybe not being up to par with some of the other engines. Shredder, of course, is well established in the chess sphere. It's been an engine that has been at the upper echelon of computer analysis for a long while. So I would not be surprised if Fire won the match, but Shredder has proven over time to be very difficult to match up against.
All right, well, we have another French defense here on the main board we have up, and we have another Tarrasch / whatever that is, kind of an interesting little Queen's Gambit being played in the other game. Although now we do have the next one underway, the match that we were just sort of talking about, Shredder and Fire, one of the ones that I am definitely most interested in. And here we have an e4, e5. All right, I think this is going to be our first double king pawn of the day, Robert.
Yeah, that's exciting. And something else that I was just thinking about is there have been a lot of games with isolated pawns. So I don't know exactly, the opening books are off, but I wonder how these engines are programmed to deal with pawn structures, because we do see a lot of isolated pawns so far in the first round. And, you just pointed out in this kind of weird Queen's Gambit decline game between Boot with the white pieces and Chiron, that again, there are some isolated pawns on that board as well. So it's been a theme of the matches thus far.
And that game, everyone, that Robert's talking about is the one there on the smaller board between Boot and Chiron. It's a strange Queen's Pawn game with both sides having an isolated D-pawn and kind of awkward development of their dark square bishops that is just not something you see theoretically played. But look at this, opening theory being played here. between Shredder and Fire. We have a Ruy Lopez, and we'll see how long they can stay on the main roads traveled, Robert, just by using their engine strength, right? Without any opening book they're accessing here. I'll be curious to see whether Fire makes a mainline move here or what move he does play. Their second game is also underway, although there we have yet another French, with it seeming to be a theme of the day, that apparently when openings books are turned off for a lot of these engines, they tend to evaluate that e4, e6 is not such a bad idea, because maybe it's something about the equilibrium of challenging the light squares. Obviously, that's a positional goal in the French to get this e6, d5 structure. So interesting to me to see that the French has been such a common theme there for Black with these openings books turned off.
Yeah, I think part of it is minimizing the disadvantage, right? We all know that White gains advantages out of the opening, some very slight, some a little briefly larger, and then complications ensue. But perhaps the reason why we're not going to see many, if any, Sicilians is because, generally speaking, if you just are a chess player of any level who goes over the games with the engine and has the engine on all times, it seems like evaluations are higher in the Sicilian, though I do recall an Alapin from the first round. So maybe just a choice, but different engines have different choices. But I imagine the French minimizes the early stage disadvantage, and that's why the engines without their opening books are playing it.
And here I'm surprised. I mean, we're talking about the French and what these openings have been choosing. Even Stockfish played the French, that being kind of the strongest engine, I think, amongst the group. But in this game here between Shredder and Fire, we have a Berlin. This is more opening theory than I feel like we've seen all day. So it's just interesting in terms of the styles of the different engines and the way they evaluate things when you turn that opening engine off. And these guys are playing theory here. This is okay. Now we have not necessarily not theory. Bishop e7 being more of a sideline in the Berlin after the move d4 played. Black choosing not to play either knight to d6, which I guess is the main line in the Berlin. So now we have something starting to get a little bit off the most beaten paths, but it's fun to see something a little different here already.
So Danny, I've played this with Black before, and the move they usually play is knight d6, bishop takes c6, b takes c6, pawn takes e5, and knight b7. And I think it was Mickey Adams who had a game in this line many years ago that I used as some inspiration. It's a very odd line. Fianchettoing your knight back on the queen side is not a typical plan of action, but it's pretty cool to see. And this is, we could see that in the game after queen e2, knight d6. It's very plausible.
Well, we'll see. Deep Shredder has played the move queen e2, Fire not having moved just yet. But the other games that are, here we go, knight d6 is played. The other game, again, you see on that small board there is the game between Boot and Chiron. We'll have a number of other games going as this second round kicks off. Let me remind you of the schedule. Again, who will be playing who right now. We have Shredder and Fire and Chiron and Boot underway. Houdini versus Fizbo is, I believe, just getting underway. And so that's going to be an interesting one. We'll keep an eye on that as far as what openings they choose. Okay, so what do we have here in this main game between Houdini and Fizbo? I'm trying to find that game right now.
Yeah, they just got underway, Houdini and Fizbo, at least Houdini with the white pieces. And it's a QGA, Queen's Gambit accepted, with the third move from White being e3 instead of e4, and Black's third move being bishop to e6. And this is, I would say, not exactly commonplace in a lot of the high-level chess.
This is a move you would criticize your beginner student from playing because it blocks your development, right? Blocks the e7 pawn and blocks the other things.
Yeah, on the plus side, it defends c4, which makes White's task of recouping that pawn a little bit more difficult. But, it's a very strange move to see on the board because, that bishop on f8 has a more difficult time of getting out. Of course, you can at some point think of going g6, bishop g7, and fianchettoing. But in the interim, White will have to figure out how to regain that pawn on c4. Or instead of doing that, gaining activity and as enough compensation for that pawn sacrifice.
Well, Stockfish likes white as well. To remind all of you that the main analysis engine we are using, that you see that eval bar adjusting as moves are played on the left side of the board, as well as the variations above the webcams here of me and Robert. Those moves are from the latest and greatest version of Stockfish at between depth 17 and depth 20, depending on how many lines we have up. But it tends to, and it can even go deeper than that, but that tends to be where it kind of caps out when you have 3 different variations being analyzed between 17 and 20. But anyway, so yeah, that'll be interesting. I think that bishop e6 is a move that either a very strong master plays, like you said, black can play g6 and bishop g7 and solve the problem of this development, even with the bishop on e6, but it is still a very awkward position for the light square bishop, that it blocks the center pawn and is also kind of a target there. Should white ever get e4 and d5 going, Robert, or even knight to g5? So here we see Fizbo all in with a6, likely preparing to play b5 and really hold on to that c4 pawn. But something tells me that there's a reason we don't see this sort of approach taken by black very often. I feel like white is going to get a big edge in this game.
Oh, I agree completely. And from black's point of view, that at some point that, as you said, the bishop will come under fire. And what you do then is probably go bishop g4, try to take on f3. So that way, at least you get rid of this piece that is going to be continuously attacked. But at the same time, if you give up that light square bishop, it's hard to compete on the light squares. Mm-hmm. And even with a common plan of a6, b5, defending the pawn on c4, at some point, white can also go b3 and chisel away at the pawn structure, and despite being down a pawn, have compensation in the form of open files on the queen side, generally speaking, the A and C files, where white can pose some threats.
Mm-hmm. As I highlighted the potential of that idea there, we see g6 being played. So Fizbo's going to try to solve his developing problems, but let's keep that game kind of in the background here and move on to the next game between Fizbo and Houdini, where we have, big surprise, yet another French, right? Houdini went for knight to g5, kind of the idea we were talking about to expose that light square bishop. But yet another French, and I don't know, we need somebody to write some sort of thesis paper on why Indians prefer the French when they have no opening book. But all right, let's check in on the other games here that we've seen, especially this first one between Chiron and Boot, because once again, Boot is coming under serious pressure. He was the only Indian to go fall 0-2 in the first round to Stockfish. What in the world happened here with the h7 pawn falling and this attack getting out of control here for white?
Well, the first thing I would note is that the material is actually even. That caught me by surprise. At first, it looks like white is just, has the bishop on h7, which is never safe for the black king.
Right.
And black has a big center in the form of those pawns on e6 and d5. But I much prefer and much more value safety of my king over a strong center.
You and me both, buddy. Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, what I have fantasies of bringing this knight into g6 at some point, right? Because there's no protection of that square.
It's not Bughouse, Robert. Don't get too excited. But yeah.
Yeah, I was like, well, let me just throw my Denny partner. Give me a knight. But
give me a knight.
realistically speaking, though, black can form some sort of defense. Knight to b4 at some point might be quite annoying to deal with, because it forces the queen either back to b1 or forward into the action via g6. But putting your queen on g6 means that the bishop on h7 can't retreat, and then knight f6 following will be annoying as well. So maybe black is not doing as badly as I initially thought. In fact, maybe sometimes the best defense is like a strong center and counterplay. So bishop d3, even rook e3. So maybe there's just a mate coming on the h file. But I guess I would say I'm not.
I think you're right. I think you made a good instructive point there, and that's a good takeaway for our viewers anyway, as none of our viewers are as strong as these engines. We can say that pretty safely, even if Magnus Carlsen is hanging out in the chat. But certainly, in most of our viewers are probably just learning how to play high level chess themselves. And you had a small instructional pearl there when you said that often the best way to deal with an attack on your own king is counterplay via the center, right? Is to build strength in the center. And in fact, in certain types of positions where maybe you're racing and you're going to lose the race of an attack, they suggest that you open the center, change the pawn structure, change the tempo of the game. So despite white having what looks to be just, I was scared the moment I came to this game. Everyone saw me thinking white's just winning, but then I look at it more closely, and you see that, okay, white obviously has the potential of an attack, but if the good center pawns can keep pieces at bay and they can have pressure, then maybe this isn't so simple, like you're saying. Maybe Chiron still has some work cut out for him. And look at this nice move, Rook A6. That's
I was
sassy.
about to say, that Rook is trying to come over to H6. So Knight B4 can come in with a tempo, and the Rook can come over to H6 to help defend the position. And from White's point of view, now maybe E5 is a potential target, right? Where I can remove the guard, the Knight on D7 at some point, and go for the E5 pawn. Knight H4, as I mentioned earlier, going to G6. Well, now it's possible because if you take me on H4, Rook H3 pins the queen, and thus White goes up material. So Knight H4 is a possibility. I'd also consider at some point Rook to C1, because Rook to C1 keeps the Knight on C6 pinned, because then Queen takes C8 is actually a pretty annoying threat.
Well, the more you talk about Knight H4, though, and you mentioned, I'm like, I'm sorry, I haven't been able to stop thinking about it since you mentioned it. Knight H4 looks really strong here. How do you deal with the threat of Knight to G6 check? When it looks like, okay, he ends up not going for it. So let's try to figure out, why didn't White play Knight H4?
So I think Rook C1, the point is just to, as I was kind of suggesting, is that now it's hard for Black to make a move, because Knight B4 was sort of a defensive idea, but Knight B4 now, I'm guessing, just falls right to Queen, some kind of Queen takes C8 stuff. So, maybe Knight H4. I mean, Knight H4 does look really good. I don't see any way to kind of counter it, but
seems likely that. Yeah, I don't know either what the real issue was there. I guess one of the issues there with Knight H4 was maybe that Black could move the knight from C6 to gain the tempo on either D4 or B4 and unleash the Rook on A6, right, to guard G6 with tempo. So perhaps that was an idea that would have stopped Knight G6 from just winning the queen and held on. Okay. And on that note, Rook C1 prevented Knight to B4 for the record, because you would have seen, I think, things like Queen takes C8, followed by just bursting through on the 8th rank with a massive mating a net. So I guess, I think we've solved why Knight H4 wasn't played. And here we go. We're going to find out if White's just making a simple move with the queen and letting Black eliminate the dangerous and dominant light square bishop, or if White has, I was going to say, queen sack time. This game is, I'm glad we're on this one. This definitely seems to be the most exciting one of the round right now. Every time you sack a queen, an angel gets his wings, Robert. Don't you ever forget it.
Well, a little angel is about to come flying out in this one, because, well, there goes the queen. But importantly, the Black king will never find shelter. So even when you sacrifice a queen, which was not captured, the problem is that Black king was really stuck. And now, in fact, if the queen takes D7, Knight takes C1, and at first, Black is up material, right? Black will be up in exchange. But the problem is that the king, again, is not safe. So moves like Rook takes E5, well, threaten Rook H5 check at the right moment. D5 is hanging. B7 is hanging. Yeah,
I was going to say, even Queen takes D5 right away, and that's what he played. I was saying I like that move even better, and now the threat of Rook takes E5, everybody. Let's just make some random move maybe to protect the knight. Rook takes E5 is threatening mate on H5 because the queen on D5 guards the G8 square. So this is looking like White has full compensation for that sacrificed exchange, even more than that. Now White's not even down material with 2 pawns for the Rook.
Yeah, in fact, endgames are very difficult because White has a lot of connected pawns and Black's pawns are all spread out, which means they're very difficult to defend. So right now, Chiron's definitely impressing, and Boot is really struggling.
Well, you can see that small board, everybody. That's the game we were analyzing. That's also looking to get a little more exciting, as Houdini seems to be pressing its space advantage with that last move F4. But we'll keep an eye on this one, try to catch the finish. Another match just getting underway is the match between Komodo and Ansax. Here we have yet another exchange French, with Komodo being white. And their second game has also started, where Komodo is black. And here we have a Tarrasch French. Interesting to see that. Go ahead.
Dan, I'm going to get us away from Komodo for just a second to go to Houdini versus, Fizbo is white, Houdini is black, because that game got So when we talk about the French defense, the exchange variation, we're not excited, but somehow this game got really crazy with the pieces just flying. And right now, Black's king is open, but White lost in the pawn on a3 as well. So I mean, this is a real fight, but I get the feeling that Black is better here because that bishop on h7 is trapped for the time being because the bishop can't get out because knight b4 will be pretty frustrating to deal with. So king g7, queen d3, and now, I think a bishop retreat maybe to either e7 or f8. I don't know which square is better yet, but...
No, you're right. Let me highlight that for the fans. If Black plays, let's just say bishop back to f8 or even bishop d6, this move, bishop f5, is not possible, everybody, because as Robert said, the knight comes to b4 and the queen is overworked. She has to choose a safe square, and then this bishop will be undefended. So that type of dynamic means that if we're comparing the h for the a-pawn, which both bishops sort of stole like a thief in the night, it seems like White has more work cut out there because the threat of knight b4 is actually already an issue, right? Even if White doesn't play bishop f5. So it seems like White's going to have a hard time.
Wow, bishop takes b2 check was played.
Wow, wait a second. I'm having trouble getting back to the main move here. Let's see. So what happened here after bishop? So in the game, he played bishop takes b2 check instead of bishop f8. Wow. I guess he's just going to play knight b4 and win his material back and stole yet another pawn. Yep, here he goes.
I mean, after knight b4, queen b5 seems to be, it attacks the knight on b4, which means the bishop on h7 might not be able to be captured yet. But I guess the problem with queen b5 was maybe rook e6, swinging that rook over to b6.
It's interesting. Right as you said that, you don't have the engine eval running as locally as I do here. But Stockfish initially liked queen b5 too and was saying, wait, White's better here. But then as soon as it sees rook e6, it changes its mind and has to go away from this. And now we're back to the position we see where White had to play queen d2. So Fizbo saw what Stockfish saw. But now both engines are likely agreeing that White is a little worse here. But this is a crazy game. I mean, honestly, like, even if White is down a pawn, I'm starting to think that White is getting an attack a little faster than Black is. Again, trying to provide human opinion to an engine game that is clearly beyond my level of understanding of chess. So, I mean, do we have to keep saying that every time we give an opinion? That comes with like a giant asterisk today. Like, we're giving chess opinions that we're not qualified to give today.
I mean, that's pretty accurate. I feel the same way, and I'm just like, I feel like I'm finding something nice, and then you're like, oh, the engine says this. I'm like, well, yep, that's too good for me. I can't handle this. So,
yep.
We do have our asterisks, but I think that game is actually fascinating, and it does teach us a lot about chess and how, even if you're down material, it's if your attack comes first, it's enough compensation. But what computers are really great at, they're very resourceful defenders, and in fact, Houdini just picked up that pawn on g4, which I, originally would not have even thought about taking, but.
I was just about to say, not only did he take the pawn on g4, but the little diagram we have here is the other game going between Houdini and Fizbo, and he just grabbed a pawn on g6 with his bishop not more than a move ago. And so pawns being grabbed by Houdini on both boards. Looks like as White, he's really in control as Black's queen is sort of running out of safe squares here. But nothing. I have no follow-up. Black's queen is running out of squares, and I'm not sure that Fizbo knows what to do either. He goes queen c6, but I think now we're going to see bishop e4. The bishop.
The knight f5 comes. That's the problem. Is bishop e4. If you go bishop d5, the knight comes f5, hitting e7. The square with check. The bishop on g7 is obviously under attack as well. So it looks like this. Honestly, looks like one of those games where Black thought there would be compensation in the form of kind of forceful queenside play, pushing the pawns down the board. But if you're losing your g6 pawn, you're really not going to be happy. And knight f5 happening.
Look how quickly Houdini plays knight f5, and knight f5 was a double attack, everybody. It threatened knight takes c7 check, which was a fork on the king and queen, but also opened up the threat of queen to g4. And, see how Houdini finishes this one off in style, but I think white has a very, very dangerous attack here. All games are underway, Robert. As we keep Houdini in the small rear view, we'll see how white finishes off that attack. Stockfish is now taking on Gaul. As white, we have a d4 game, and when Gaul is white, we have, drum roll please, an exchange French. So,
I love how disappointed you sounded when you said that. You're like, drum roll, oh gosh, another exchange.
Drum roll please, and okay, Houdini is really taking it to Chiron in that game, Fizbo in that game with knight takes g7, f5 is coming, and that game's out of control. But where should we go now? All 10 games are underway. Remind everybody, if you are just joining us, there is $2,500 on the line as the world's top 10 engines who've been invited. You can see their names right there. Battle it out in our first ever Chess.com Computer Chess Championship. But all 10 games can be viewed. If you don't like where Robert and I are, just log into Chess.com's live server and find the game you want to follow on your own. Robert, where should we journey to now?
I think we should journey back to potentially to Chiron and Boot. They were the first match that got underway of the round, and it looks like in the game where Chiron is white, Boot has a rook for a knight and 2 pawns. We've gotten to an end game, so Black's king is saved. No worries of an attack anymore, but I don't see how Black can make progress in a position like this, where the rook situates itself to defend the knight. Yes, the knight can't move, but neither can Black's pieces. I don't really see any way to improve the position. So to me, it looks like the game should peter out into a draw. I see a mutual kind of stagnation here. So
yeah,
I'd be very surprised if anything but a draw happened in that one.
I agree, and there's not even really any threats by the Black king to make progress, as the white rook owns the d file, and the Black king can't even really march up the e file to try to disrupt this sort of blockade, because there's no available squares. The knight and the f3 pawn guard everything that white needs. So we'll see how long it takes for them to agree that this game has nothing to fight for. What about the game where Chiron has Black? And this one, it looks like Boot is working an advantage here, and that would be nice for the engine that fell 0-2 to Stockfish in round 1 to get a win here. Looks like white has a huge attack. Here comes threats like knight to g5. And how is Black dealing with this rook on f7 and the king?
I think white's just winning, because not only is there a pin on the rook on f7, the pawn on d5 can be just captured. If necessary, the h3 pawn is also targeted right now. So queen b5 was played, and yeah, queen takes d5, and now, I mean, so what? White is up 2 pawns. There is a4 is a really nice move. It's just played. So it's distracting the queen, saying you can't, pressure the back rank and pin my rook at the same time. And king to e2. So I guess knight e5 is possible here. Yep. And
there's a lot of threats here that Black has to deal with. I guess the most obvious one is that the bishop was hanging. Okay, now he goes into the rook ending where he's just going to clean up. Because despite that knight falling with check, white's king is going to come from f3 to g4, gobble up the h3 pawn, and white is going to be up 3 pawns in this rook ending. So that means Boot is going to take its matchup with Chiron as likely that first game we were looking at. Whoa, did Boot find a way to? Okay, probably this is still just a draw on the first one, though the blockade was broken between the knight and the 2 pawns, but still there isn't really any chance that the Black can win this endgame, unless short of some sort of massive lack of understanding of how to draw king and knight versus king and rook by Chiron, which I doubt.
Danny, there's a fascinating development in Fire versus Shredder, where
take me there. I'm there.
Fire is white, Shredder is up a piece, but both knights are permanently pinned. So the queen on g5 cannot be moved from its spot. The king can't move because then the knight on f6 is hanging.
Wow.
So Black is up a piece for a pawn, but as you just see, the move f4 is played with a threat of f5. And in fact, a move like you can't even move the queen anywhere, right? You can only shuffle it back and forth. And after f5 was played, this is what I call not looking good for Black.
Yeah, is white threatening a massive simplification? Who wins the king and pawn ending if white took everything on f6 and took on g6 and took on b4? It may not be the best, but I'm just curious now. Anytime you have an opportunity for such massive exchanges, everybody, you have to be calculating what the endgame transition might be.
And a very important question, Danny, is if white is somehow able to go king e3 before initiating all the captures on f6, because if that king can situate itself in a more centralized fashion, and king e1 was indeed played, the point is that at some point you're going to take on g6, trade all the pieces on f6, and the important thing that white will try to do is go a3 or a4 and get an outside pass pawn. That is the winning strategy you generally need in the endgame. And so king f8 was played here to avoid
sort of a desperate move, king f8.
Yeah, very desperate. And after bishop takes f6, it's not even a check here, right? And knight e5 falls right to queen g7 check. So knight e7 was played, but now after king d2 is a great move. I think you can just exchange everything on e7 in the near future.
Now he can transition to the king and pawn ending, which is probably this.
Although bishop e7 and queen takes h5 is also another pawn that's available to be captured. Bishop takes e7, queen 7, f6 can be an idea at some point. Not right now. It doesn't seem to work out as well. But
the good news. Go ahead.
No, sorry. Go ahead, Danny.
I was just going to say the good news is that we finally got some fans talking about how much they love the Matrix behind me. Since obviously today is man and machine becoming one, I'm trapped in the Matrix. Sorry, I've just been waiting.
Should I start calling you Keanu instead of Danny?
Exactly, you should, and you can be my Morpheus anytime. Isn't that what he says in Top Gun? You can be my Morpheus anytime.
That is also just the nicest thing you've ever said to me. So I feel like we're really connecting today.
We're really connecting today. But all right, thank you, fans, for noticing the Matrix, which I am currently trapped in, as we attempt to provide commentary on computer understanding. You can be my agent. Are you my Agent Smith today? Sorry, go ahead. I'll get back to chess. What's going on?
I am your Agent Smith. We have two draws. Chiron with white against Boot. That game was a draw. We had looked at that a bunch earlier. That was the extra exchange game. And then Shredder with white against Fire. Shredder was held to a draw in that game. The weird Berlin opening where the knight went to b7.
Right.
That game held as well. So Fire can upset Shredder. I don't know if it's an upset. I mean, they're, but Fire is doing well to, take out Shredder here. In this game, white up 2 pawns.
Yeah, here white has to play king e3. Not exactly sure what Fire is thinking about, but this is an interesting moment. Again, I want to highlight the difference between how humans and computers would think about this, because even though back to this move 50 where white played bishop takes e7 and played queen takes h5, to me, like, I guess it's true that white's winning there. I would be nervous to play a queen and pawn ending because those endgames are just there's so much to calculate, so many opportunities for the defender to get a perpetual check and to trick you. So if I had the opportunity to kind of grind out the position and keep a bind, I would be in a human way biased toward that approach, right? Where now you're going to see that black's going to get a ton of checks, but Fire doesn't care, right? Because he's a computer and he knows that this is a winning endgame. It's just a matter of finding the right way to do it. But it does open up that door for perpetual checks, specifically that occur in queen and pawn endings.
Right, and it's important to remember the time control, 15-minute plus 2-second increment, that they could be in pretty deep time trouble at this moment, which means that the engine will not be able to run as long as it would like to really kind of see all the possibilities as deeply as possible. So,
which means maybe we could see a blunder of someone thinking, "Oh, I'm up +3, but wait, it's a perpetual check, and I missed that." Okay, but we have a decisive result, the first one of round 2.
Boot.
That's what I'm talking about. Right? Come on, that's what I'm talking about. Can we get confirmation on whether Boot's developers are Canadian or not? Can someone get on that? Go ahead, Robert.
No, I just, I feel like it's an upset. I feel like we had Boot as the underdog, even though it seems that, in Boot is clearly at least as good as Chiron. It beat Chiron. So that game was a Queen's Gambit decline that we didn't really look at very much because, just frankly, I'm sick of the Queen's Gambit decline at this point.
I'm sick of the Queen's Gambit decline and the French. We're doing everything we can to talk about anything but if we want to show real quick, everybody, this was the weird Tarrasch that occurred in this game. Instant replay is what we're talking about when Boot gets a win. You know why? Because Boot lost 0-2 to Stockfish. That's why I think we had it. I think psychologically, it's understandable we didn't think Boot was really the favorite against Chiron because because Boot was the only engine to go down 0-2 to Stockfish, but now he puts on a positional mastery and outplays black positionally. The knight hopping around like he owns the board. Look at that.
Yeah,
Boot just took it to Chiron in this game.
It honestly looks like a knight d2 French-style position, but importantly, I've learned that Boot is from is a Ukrainian-backed engine. So of course, we can see this technique in the play. It's kind of Elyanov style coming through here.
We have another decisive result, Robert. We left this game between Houdini and Fizbo somewhere in the middle game when Houdini was rocking things with knight takes g7, everybody. But Houdini just went on to crush Fizbo with an awesome attack. This nice move f6 on move 39, which is does two things. It cuts off the queen's protection of the b6 knight and threatens the mating net with the rook lift. So, okay, so Houdini also wins. So let's go back to the schedule. What does that mean? Where are we at now? We've seen Boot take down Chiron. Shredder and Fire are not done yet, and with one game in the books as a draw, we're seeing whether Fire can take the cake. But Houdini is taking down Fizbo, and it might even be a 2-0 victory if Houdini can get a win as black. Let's go back to that one right here. But I guess, okay, he can't win this one with the rook and knight. Likely not.
No, definitely not. And that was very smart. I mean, I don't know if you consider it smart, but it's accurate to sacrifice the knight for the 2 pawns, because rook versus rook and knight is a pretty straightforward draw, especially, engines will never lose that position because, it's book, right? It's very well known. A human wouldn't lose this position, and an engine certainly will not. So, Fizbo, despite getting bullied, managed to hold this one. I really think Fizbo...
Despite being bullied in high school, Fizbo. Okay, we're back to this game that we've been talking about. Fizbo's had a rough go of it since high school, and he was always mad at his mom for naming him Fizbo. It was weird, but look at this one here. This is Boot is Ukraine. So the table bases are on, and that's an interesting fact. Another fun fact that we'll have for tomorrow's show, along with the openings are off, but table bases are on. So that means that if these endgames do reach a theoretical draw, like Robert was talking about with Houdini and Fizbo here, this is a theoretical draw. You really shouldn't see anybody lose these endgames. But let's talk about this one here with Fire and Deep Shredder, because I find it instructive to see how computers play queen and pawn endings better than humans. Again, as a human, I am always afraid of these endgames because I feel like I'm blowing my 2-pawn advantage and giving them all these great chances for perpetual check. But engines they walk where angels fear to tread, right? They're willing to walk their king up the board in what looks like 13 checks, but it's not going to be 15, and they can see ahead of the time and know that, right? I mean, I'm going to be interested to see how Fire wins this one here.
Well, there's a good point to be made that White's pawns, and White is up 3 pawns, are actually very well blockaded, which means that you can't really waste a move or use it as a distraction, which is often necessary in queen endings where you're up a pawn. You can distract the king or the queen with one of the pawns, and then try to mop up the rest of the board with the other. And so right now, Black is doing well to hold a pretty decent defense, but as this now g5 comes, that is very important.
Yeah,
I would have captured the pawn h4 a little while ago just to say, well, now I'm preventing any g5 breaks, and that keeps Black totally at bay. But now, after this queen c2 check move,
he's giving up the f5 pawn though. This can't be an improvement of the winning chances.
You're running out of checks. So queen f3, queen d6, king g4, and it looks like it should run out of checks, but maybe not. There's still queen d7 check. So where is this king going?
Yeah, I mean, White is up more than enough pawns that any queen trade, despite even losing one of them, is still going to be easily winning for Fire. But as much as I'm sort of, I've been touting the fact that computers go for these queen and pawn endings with less fear than humans because they don't allow the perpetual checks. I've been touting that, and it looks like Fire might be on pace to allow a perpetual check. I mean, this is why humans think about these endgames differently than computers. But okay, looks like White did finally find a way to get safe and Fire is going to go on to win this game now.
And something very important to note was after f5 by Black.
Yep.
Queen to e6 was like the natural move, but then Queen e4 check might turn the tides there.
Whoa, that would have been a sweet little effect there. Okay, so that's why he didn't play King e6, but he was still in the driver's seat as it was and as it is currently in the live position.
This is just over. You can't even give another check because Queen f6 blocks and delivers a check of its own. 3 pawns up. Fire is taking Shredder down.
So this, in the end, does turn out to be a really great example of what I was kind of saying. Again, where engines take the different approach as compared to humans. Totally willing to go to a queen and pawn ending. I have no idea what just happened there, but somehow it ends in a checkmate. While we have everyone's attention, I just think if you go back to where this endgame first was transitioned to, I mean, there were just so many opportunities where you would think this is a dangerous way for White to try to win, but the engine is super patient, knows that he can allow 1.5 million checks as long as he doesn't allow 1.2 million, and eventually the White King will find safety. And Robert, I just love this because I'm sorry I'm belaboring the point, but I think it's really instructive to see that the engines know at some point that King can find a safety from check even in the middle of the board, and White goes on to win this game. So interesting stuff.
Oh, very interesting, and I feel like I haven't seen Shredder get obliterated like that since like one of the Ninja Turtle movies, right? So
whoa! Hashtag first Ninja Turtle movie reference of any chess TV show ever. Robert takes the pop culture cake today. That was nice.
I feel like Donatello.
You feel like Donatello with the way you're destroying Shredder. Visbo, Fire feels like Donatello with the way he's destroying Shredder today. The favorite Ninja Turtle?
Oh, definitely Donatello.
Yeah, smartest Ninja Turtle, right? It kind of got that geeky but kind of handsome thing going, right? Still gets the ladies, even though he's a nerd, that kind of thing, right?
Absolutely.
All right, well, I'm looking at Ghul versus Stockfish. We haven't given Stockfish much love. Partly that's because as every round kicks off, everybody, let's remind you of the schedule. Stockfish starts late. I guess we saved the best for last. So you're going to see Komodo's matches and Stockfish's kind of toward the end of every round. Because of that, we may not look at that deeply in all of their openings, but it will mean that we get to see a lot of their critical moments as the other games finish. So where would you like to go to, partner, since there's still, by my count, about 5 games going? 4 games going.
Let's hop over to this Komodo Ansax. I don't know how to pronounce that engine, but that's an interesting queen and pawn endgame. So both sides have queen and 3, but 2 of Black's pawns are on the king side, whereas all 3 of White's are on the queen side. We have a double pawn, which I don't think is that meaningful in the current position, but I think White's king is always vulnerable for perpetual check, right? Unless that king runs somehow up to the queen side, but in which case that G pawn, if I'm Black, I'm really starting to consider when can I move that G5 pawn. Sorry, it's not on G5 yet. I'm getting ahead of myself. But when can I move the pawn to G5 and potentially G4 and create a little bit of an annoyance for the White King? However, with the protected past A pawn, I don't really see how Black can make any progress.
Now the B pawn may be threatening to fall, but I guess if Ansax takes it, Komodo's pointing out that the queen on B4 is less than ideally placed as far as checks go, and White would have just pushed the A pawn. But this is going to be another game similar to the last one we just saw, Robert, where if Komodo wins this, it's going to be because he evaluated correctly that his king could eventually escape perpetual checks, and that the passed A pawn would be enough to win the endgame.
And that's a very instructional point that you made about queen takes before the queen is kind of out of place. The importance in endgames often is quality of pawns over quantity of pawns. So White does not mind giving up the B4 pawn if it means that the A5 pawn can approach A7. Because once the pawn's on A7, Black is completely tied down to the promotional square. And if the square promotion obviously is the most important one, and A8 is not an easy square to reach from Black's point of view. So instead, we're going to see a perpetual check here, or a 3-time repetition, I should say. And this game will end in a draw, which is great for Ansax, because in the other game,
it's huge for Ansax because he's drawing as Black, and he's about to do the same or win here as White. No, I guess it's just going to be a draw. Okay, the Black King will get back in time. So no way we don't see that as an upset. Ansax pulling a drawn match against Komodo, right?
Yeah, Ansax has been impressive thus far. I mean, drawing Komodo here And in the first round, Ansax was playing Shredder, and wasn't that the two draws?
Yeah, that match was double draws.
So Ansax Geary over here making all draws.
Ansax Geary, LOL. Hashtag
But-
first Geary draw reference of the day.
What should not be a draw, I would say, is this Gaul Stockfish match, because
Stockfish is on his way to just running away with this event at this point. I mean,
and both Stockfish games are extremely interesting. The one where Stockfish is white,
yep.
is, what is a very popular line. This position happened. This is actually the opening where Vichy crushed Magnus in their World Championship match. Of course, this game went in a different trajectory, but white has a humongous spatial advantage. Black is hoping that the pawn on d4 is enough of a weakness so that that is enough compensation to hold. But from the point of view of white here, like, for example, Rook a7 is a move you'd love to play. Bishop takes d4 already is a tactic that ends in Black's favor. But Rook a8 is a starting point. The queen will come to c7, or b7 only moves. But I don't know. Now you can even go Rook a7 and continue the
or
squeeze.
even Queen a7, and you're now look at this. White is saying, I know the d4 pawn's going to fall, but he's all in on winning the c8 bishop. The main line we might see here, everybody, because I'm not sure how Ghul avoids it. Something like trade on a7, and after the end of the d4 pawn hanging, white brings the rook right back to a8. But what's interesting about this is, okay, that's a piece, but black just got so many pawns. It's I don't think it's just a walk in the park as far as how white converts that endgame, and we're going to find out, because that's exactly the variation we're about to see.
I was going to say Rook c7 is a good move, because you want to keep the rooks on the board.
Mm-hmm.
And if let's say everything a trade on c8, right? We can just imagine there's a knight on c8 and no rooks on the board. The black game goes from f8 to e8 to d7 very quickly, and the pawn on c6 is very hard to attack in that situation. Now, on the other hand, there's another target, the f7 pawn. That is a point of weakness for black, and with the knight on the board, okay, it already went to e5, forcing this exchange. Now white is up a bishop, but the rook and the bishop can team up together to start becoming a nuisance with the pawns. And for example, pawn takes e5. If black goes rook c8 to protect the c-pawn, h6 check should be considered. That way, if the king captures on h6, rook takes f7, then e6 will fall. If the king doesn't capture on h6, you force the king to the back rank, after which, and here we see h6 check, the king goes in the back rank, then white just makes simple progress, and the black king is never getting back into the game.
Fascinating and instructive points. You just gave like a dozen of them, but I'm going to highlight one thing that you said that stuck out for me as Stockfish is looking like he's going to convert this. Back in this moment where Stockfish played, as you said, the move rook to c7, and you talked about how you want to keep the rooks on the board rather than rook a8. It's so important, I think, for beginning members, or let's say lower level chess players, who you hear that phrase when you're a kid, Robert, right? As soon as you're up material, trade pieces, right? But as your advantages decrease a little bit and you learn that a position where your opponent has several pawns, sometimes even 3 or 4 pawns for a piece, you don't just want to trade pieces in the same way that you normally learned when you were younger and they said, oh, you're up material, just trade blindly, right? In this case, the fact that white keeps the rook on the board and the fact that white gets that target on f7 is the main reason why white was able to get winning chances in this endgame, because black had so many pawns. And it's just an instructive moment as you're playing your own games to say that as you outplay your opponent and you've worked so hard to earn that advantage, you don't blow that advantage by just assuming, okay, now I'm up a piece, I can just trade everything and this endgame is going to get easier to win as every piece comes off the board. A lot of advantages are blown that way rather than keeping the key pieces on the board. A rook and a bishop, as Robert is pointing out, that's going to allow them to gang up on weaknesses because white has more pieces. Principle of 2 weaknesses is much more likely when you have more pieces that you can outplay your opponent with. So anyway, you said a lot of things, but I think it's a super instructive moment, and it's why Stockfish is going to go on to win this game. But is he going to win this match? Let's go to this game here where he's black against Ghul. He's up a pawn, but in this one, this is a much harder one to push forward, because if you ever get crazy with this d-pawn, Robert, probably black's king on f7 comes under fire.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of those positions where, okay, we have the engines and we see their evaluations and everything is under control, but it's one of those positions where it can easily turn in white's favor because of the safety of the king. So king on f7 at some point could become victim to a queen h8 to h7, whereas a king on h3 is actually very difficult to make any progress on. It's like queen e5 here looks a bit scary, but then black just goes queen back to d8, covers all the vital squares in the e-file. The queen will have to go back to d4. Queen f8 is the same idea as queen d8. The queen should go back to d4 to prevent the advance of the d-pawn, and I think this game is just a draw because there's no way either side can make any thing resembling progress.
So on that note, I guess Stockfish will end up winning the match, assuming that he converts this game here as white, as we think he's going to now with the move rook to c7 likely, which, by the way, threatens bishop h7 check as well, everybody, which is why rook a2 doesn't help. So Stockfish is going to go on to win this game against Ghul, which means, again, Robert, as far as our matchups have gone, Stockfish will be really in the driver's seat as far as taking the lead in our tournament format. He won his first match 2-0 against Boot, if you're just joining us, and he's on pace to win 1.5 here. What about Komodo? Is Komodo going to keep pace? He drew the first one against Ann Sachs, couldn't get out of the perpetual check, and now he'll be lucky to draw, or he can only draw this one. So it looks like Komodo, right, the kind of the second challenger there to Stockfish is going to fall behind here, as he's not going to beat Ann Sachs in this match here.
Yeah, I mean, white is up a pawn. Ann Sachs is the only one who could possibly win this game. It is a draw. The king is well positioned to defend against the passed pawn. At any point, if the pawn goes to b7 and you're not able to queen it the next move, the bishop will just capture it. And of course, bishop and king versus the king is a draw. There's no way to deliver a checkmate. So right now, you just put the king onto b8.
But yeah, now it's really over, because I wonder why Komodo. That's again where humans think differently. Like, Komodo's moving the bishop. Just play the moment they let you get your king in front of the pawn in this bishop ending. That's what you do, right? But that statement is a human statement, right? The moment you get your king in front of the pawn, engines don't think like that. They just calculate the fastest way to draw. So
yeah, and I think they all are kind of equivalent paths to the draw, but it's just like it doesn't matter. And like you said, the quickest path that we know it's a draw. Like, we're strong enough players to say, of course this is a draw. There's no way to make progress. We don't actually know what the quickest.
But see, right there, right? Like king d7. Like, a human never plays king d7. A human plays king to b8, like moves the bishop, right? It never moves the king to a square that isn't directly in front of the pawn. But again, the engine doesn't care about that, because his goal is to draw the game. And so optically, the fact that the king goes away from the b pawn is irrelevant to Komodo.
Yep. So that game is officially drawn, which just leaves the two Stockfish Ghul games and
both are on their way to victory for Stockfish.
Do you see what just happened in this game?
Which one?
I'm
looking at the one where Stockfish is white.
No, look at Stockfish is white. Move 60. Black was rook a7. And then white went bishop b7.
That is super weird.
And it wasn't captured. And then white just gave up the e-pawn. What is going on? Has it turned into losing chess?
No, it's like an end game where they... Okay, remember, everybody, these games are being relayed by it's an equal server for all engines, so no hardware advantages there for anybody. But it's a 15-minute with a 2-second increment time control, like the Pro Chess League. So it's rapid, and then it turns into blitz chess. And I think that's why we saw bishop b7 and then him just give up the e-pawn. I think Stockfish is literally living off the increment right now, so making moves instantaneously so that it doesn't lose on time. I think that's all it was, Robert. I think he just made moves that were bad because of time pressure.
Yeah, and the 6 pieces on the board, can do a table base. So I guess, even with right now they're 1, 2, can't even count this fast. 2 versus 4. Now it's six pieces. It has table base. Okay, checkmate. That was very weird. I felt like I was watching a game of like people who just learned how to play chess.
Right. But again, it's exactly what you said. It's because the engine is referencing a table base and just going for whatever line it calculated, right?
Yeah, so it went to reach the table base position, so it didn't have to think anymore, essentially. But in the final game between Ghul and Stockfish, where Ghul is white, looks like a draw. Neither side
a draw. Yep.
Yeah, neither side can make progress. There's a zillion checks for both sides. Whoever gets the checks can start, but
and
dead draw.
Even our own Stockfish is pointing out at depth 25 there before it moved. Again, our analysis engine that we have looking at every game live as it's in progress is Stockfish. And it also says it's just a draw. Nothing to play for here. So nothing to see here, folks. Turn away. Oh my gosh, Robert. I don't even know what to say about what we've seen so far. I feel like we're going to have therapy after this event that we're covering. I mean,
absolutely. I mean, I feel like I already need it. I felt like I needed it before we, even sat down.
I'm currently in therapy, so that's okay. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. Anyway,
I find your friendship therapeutic, Danny.
Yeah, well, you know what? Same thing. We're doing our best together to provide commentary on something that we don't understand. But with that draw, let's remind you of how these matchups went in round 2. We saw Boot. That's what we're talking about. Boot came through and beat Chiron despite losing 0-2 to Stockfish. If you look at round 1's 12-20 matchup, Shredder and Fire, Fire won. Right, finding a way to grind down Shredder in that instructive queen and pawn ending. Houdini beat Fizbo, kind of like a wicked stepchild who had taken some candy or something. It was not good, right? Fizbo got it. Fizbo was remembering his days of being bullied in high school. Komodo and Ansax. I think that was really the match of the round, though it didn't get much much instructive commentary from us, Robert, because it was kind of boring, but Komodo just failed to do anything special against Ansax. And then, of course, we just saw Stockfish beat Ghul. So your thoughts, buddy?
I'm pleasantly surprised by Ansax. I mean, it's been a very strong defensive force, has drawn both of its matches with 0 defeats, right? So 4 draws is kind of what you kind of expect from computers. Oh, all games are going to be drawn. But I've been very excited to see that, well, no, not at all. I mean, White is winning the majority of the games. And we've had 0 wins with the black pieces. So perhaps we'll see our first win with the black pieces in this 3rd round coming up. But, we did see 1 because there was a 2-0 score in the first round with Stockfish.
By Stockfish, yeah. That was the only game we've seen black get a victory. Stockfish just overwhelming Boot in the first round. Wow. Well, round 3, which will be our final round of the day, will be getting set to start momentarily. Let me remind everybody what's coming up tomorrow. Schedule on day 2. It's going to be similar to what you've seen today. Matchups. Like we said, it's a round robin in the preliminary stages until we reach the super final, which is Thursday morning. The 2 engines with the best scores will move on into the super final. So tomorrow we've got all these matchups, and then day 3. Once again, more matchups, and finally ending round 9 with Stockfish versus Komodo, saving that legendary matchup, the best for last. Though somehow I feel like Stockfish's advantage over Komodo in the rapid time control is going to be greater than it normally is in the TCEC. But we will find out. Either way, I agree with you. Ansax has kind of been the story of the day so far, and there we go. So, what should we talk about now, my friend, before the next round begins?
Well, first I want to give a shout out to Magnus Carlsen because, I know a lot of chess fans have been watching the match versus Dingley Ren. And I believe if I'm counting correctly, Magnus has won 4 straight games, 2 with white, 2 with black against Ding. So that is an impressive showing. That's the closest we have to, any competitor who can take on an engine, but no, you can't because engines are that strong. But got to give props to.
He's our John Connor. Should the world end tomorrow when Skynet becomes self-aware, Magnus would be our John Connor. That's what you're saying. I
think that's a great call. I can be Donatello, he'll be John Connor, and we'll have a good time of it.
You got some love in the Twitch chat. Prime K Hertz gave you a shout out for your Donatello reference.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. But all right, speaking of that, let's call an audible as we wait for the next round to start. Let's be honest, you and I have nothing better to do with our lives than sit here, and I'm trapped in the Matrix. You're apparently about to go Pleasantville and jump into a black and white painting of New York. But we've got Magnus Carlsen taking on Dingley Ren, and we see our awesome live engine analysis of it. So Magnus is currently running away with this match. I got to be honest, well, first of all, Dingley Ren has just been absolutely had an amazing 2017, right? I mean, he qualified for the candidates at the World Cup. He played what is in most people's eyes the game of the year like 2 weeks ago, right? Just an incredible game. For those who didn't see it, you can check out Chess Center. Me and Simon went over it. But So I thought that Ding might be giving Magnus a little more of a hard time, but maybe Magnus is sending a message here like, hey, Ding, if you qualify to play me through the candidates, don't expect to win that world championship match. Just don't expect that to happen.
Danny, I think it's exactly what he's doing because they don't have a long career against each other. I think they played 2 classical games before, and there is a huge psychological component to chess, of course. And so he can get in his head. I mean, he's won 4 straight games against him. That, we try to say that chess was a short memories. Yes, we have to forget our losses, but we end up remembering them. And, if they happen to play a world championship match, if Ding Liren qualifies, he will not forget his beatdown of the hands of Magnus Carlsen.
Yeah.
So,
I think... Yeah, and I mean, Espen, obviously Magnus's manager, I'm sure a lot of strategy went into their opportunity to say, oh, who would you want to play in a match? Let's play somebody who we think we might actually have a chance of playing in a match in the future and send a message. Shout out to Chess Fight Club, who just clipped one of the highlight moments from the Stockfish game in last round. I want to remind all the fans who are watching us, whether you're on Chess.com TV or Twitch TV/chess, I just want to remind you that Robert loves you. I love you as well, but Robert really loves you. Sometimes off air, I'm like, Robert, it's awkward, right? But
I mean, it's only awkward when they're making fun of you, and I appreciate it.
Right.
So.
Anyway, so thank you to user Chess Fight Club in the Twitch chat who just created a clip of the Stockfish moment. If you don't know how to create a clip on Twitch and share your favorite moments from all of the matches and the shows that we have here, please learn how to do it. Google create clips on Twitch and create some clips of your favorite moment from your favorite chess TV shows. Please do that. Subscribe to our Twitch channel as well. We always love the support from everybody supporting Twitch TV/chess. Robert, you got your own Twitch channel. Let's do a shout out for that while you're here. Where can everybody follow and follow you and subscribe to you on Twitch?
If they feel like they must follow me, which they don't have to, but is highly recommended. I'm going to start streaming more for sure, and you can follow me. I don't even know what is my Twitch right now. GMRLH2.
GMRLH2. First of all, I mean, everyone wants to follow you. All right, so don't even downplay that. But yes, you are going to be doing more and more streaming. As Chess.com, we announced our official Twitch partnership, and officially round 3 is underway. So enough filling space, Magnus. As much as we want to see you win this game as Black against Ding Liren, we are on to Fizbo versus Boot. We've got Fizbo, who, Fizbo's in need of a bounce-back match, okay? Fizbo, he got a haircut. He was like he's in that movie, right, where Adrian Grenier just gave him a, attaboy, and now he's learning how to be cool, right? He's no longer the dorky kid in high school. So Fizbo needs a win here, and he's taking on Boot, who just took down Chiron. But Boot, I think the jury's still out on Boot, right? We don't know exactly what we're talking to Boot yet, because Boot lost 0-2 to Stockfish, but then he turned around and beat Chiron. So this should be interesting.
I'm too busy thinking about this haircut. Any haircut Fizbo's going to get is like a bowl mushroom cut. Like, it's not going to look good. It's going to be more to be made fun of. I just have no faith in Fizbo right now. I really think that Boot is, in the driver's seat again. But part of the problem is they don't have emotions, right? They're engines, so it's not like there's like a confidence built up from winning a sweet game. So we see a Caro Khan by Fizbo, and this is exactly why I told you Fizbo is the kid that gets bullied, because he's playing the Caro Khan. I mean, come on, like, you can't put the Caro against an experienced engine like Boot, 6.2, right? Like, this is I can't. I think Boot is going to crush Fizbo in this game. Maybe I'm too anti-Caro Khan for my own good.
I have never almost spit out water in the middle of a chess TV show. You just and I've done, I think, more things than most people have ever done on chess shows because I'm weird. I mean, I've literally got a fat head of MVL that I keep close to my bedside, okay? I mean, we know I'm a psycho, but you just gave me a first, Robert, so thank you for that. I literally had to hold back. No wonder he's the engine that gets bullied because he plays the Caro Khan. What are we doing right now? We're applying personification, right? When you imply human tendencies to non-human to inanimate objects, right? Isn't that what it's called, personification?
Yep.
Look at me, high school dropout, coming up with some English terms. Anyway, but you applied the greatest personification to Fizbo ever with the bowl mushroom haircut, playing the Caro Khan. Sorry, I almost lost it. I almost spit out the water, which has never happened to me. All right, so Fizbo, we'll see if Fizbo can put the Never underestimate the underdog. Always have fear of the underdog, but Fizbo at this point is proving not to be the underdog, but something else. And we've got a couple of lame openings coming out of this one. An exchange French to boot. And
I mean, come on, Fizbo.
Yeah.
Like, do something right. And if you're going to give it any sort of like human-like figure, it's going to be like Gumby. Like, this is, I can't, I don't like Fizbo. Maybe I need to learn better.
We got to give a shout out to Anthropomorphizing, who's, user Black Albino is clipping the Danny almost spits up water from what Robert said clip. That is a great clip. Please tweet that at me. I'll retweet it for sure. All right, well, at least here's where I go. At least the Caro-Cans knew, okay? We've seen all the exchange Frenches and Tiraches we can handle today. At least the Caro-Can, to me, it's similar to seeing the Berlin last round, Robert. I'm like giving a thumbs up. At least we have a new opening to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, I personally love playing against the Caro-Can, and we see that after knight takes e4, Fizbo lost the opening book. Well, you can't use it, and played knight f6.
Right,
which is a line that just hands white a very, very...
And the reason everybody... Okay, mainline theory is the move bishop f5. This is the classical Caro-Can that if you don't know the theory, go to chess.com/openings and learn the theory after bishop f5. But without the opening book, as you said, knight f6, which after white is going to play knight takes f6 check here. I assume that Boot is not going to outthink himself. You literally have a structure where black is choosing between poisons of taking with the e-pawn and giving white the safest 4-on-3 positional pawn majority you've ever seen, or playing g takes f6, which is a hideous structure on the king side where the king is most likely to need a safe haven. So, Robert, I agree with you wholeheartedly that knight f6 is a sign that Fizbo... That might be... Maybe this is helpful for the developers. All jokes aside, and we're not trying to make fun of Fizbo any more than we already have, but... clearly I think that some of these engines, Robert, are handling themselves better without the opening books than others, right? And Fizbo has been consistently worse out of the opening. I think that's a fair observation at this point through round 3, right? So maybe that's a good thing for the developers of Fizbo to kind of be a little more aware of whatever the investment is they're making there as far as improving the machine learning process. That might be a place to focus on.
Danny, I think I was thinking in my head why Fizbo sounds so familiar. And you can correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know if you watch Modern Family, but isn't Fizbo the clown that Cam dresses up as?
Is that what it is? Can we get a stat check on that? Can somebody give us a stat check?
Can someone verify? Because I really feel like that's why the name Fizbo is really bothering me, and like I'm getting it from. And I'm pretty sure that what Fizbo is from.
Okay, but we have to also, I applauded myself for being a high school dropout who correctly applied the term personification. Turns out I need to go back to high school because it's anthropomorphizing.
Yeah, anthropomorphism would be the noun.
Anthropomorphism is the noun. Anthropomorphizing is the process of applying human emotions to inanimate objects. So it's not personification, it's anthropomorphizing. I stand corrected. All that matters. And, oh, yes, we are getting confirmation. Fizbo is the clown from Modern Family. That's what it is.
Wow.
Okay.
Well,
here's what matters. Ansax and Ghul is now live. And this, Robert, this is a big matchup here as far as where these two engines stand. Because Ghul, like I said, has kind of been the sexy flavor of the latest open source engine that has gotten love. Why? Because of a lot of people, with Stockfish having dominated and established itself as by far and away the strongest open source flavor, of any engine in machine learning in chess, Ghul has really turned some heads with its quick rise through the ranks. So, and then Ansax is also one of the newest flavors, and we've seen Ansax do well, who just held Komodo to a draw in round 2. So this round here, Ghul versus Ansax, this is where our focus needs to be.
Yeah, and firstly, you'll be upset because it was a closed Sicilian, and I know how much you make fun of the closed Sicilian, but I do not really like how black has handled it because this e5, c5 setup permanently leaves the d5 square under white's control.
Yep.
Very commonly played in these structures, d3, knight d2, knight f1, knight e3. Just bring the knight to e3 to further control the d5 square. You don't care if black goes after your bishop on c4. That's not the important piece. Eventually, white can try to go f4 once that knight is removed as well to open the f file for the rook that will eventually be on f1 once you castle. So opening advantage for Ansax in that game. And the other one between Ansax and Gaul is a semi-Slav. And okay, it's very early in the game. It's too early for me to say that white has an advantage. Yes, the white pieces often get a slight edge in the opening, but so far we haven't seen enough to really allow me to make a comment on the trajectory of this game. So pretty standard.
Okay. Well, back to the close Sicilian one that you were just talking about. I want to highlight, as you said, that the close Sicilian by pure semantics, everybody, is a Sicilian where you don't play d4. Basically, you don't open the center and fight for black's control over the dark squares. Normally, the traditional close Sicilians, you might see white play a move like knight to c3 first instead of knight f3 to keep ideas like f4 open. That would be the horribly dubious close Sicilian you see guys like Robert Hess play on a regular basis. But the close Sicilian played here with knight f3 and then knight to c3 and bishop to c4, like you said, Robert, is okay, it's designed on more of a slow play of this remaneuvering of the knight to eventually get f4. And when you get this move bishop to c4 in so early with control of the light squares, it just makes no sense that black has played e5. If you're a close Sicilian player out there, g6 would have been better here on move 3. Even e6 is better on move 3. Just about any move other than the positionally dubious e5 that was played. So just want to add that little positional flavor since we are getting our chance to talk about a Sicilian different than a French. So, Robert, now you can take your shot at me, whatever you were going to say about my comments on your dubious opening repertoire.
I actually just chose to ignore you for the time being and be a serious commentator because I've already made been focusing on Fizzbo the Clown too much. So it looks like we have two more games up here with Komodo and Fire. That's going to be a very interesting match as well.
I
of course,
agree.
we know and love Komodo, but Fire has been proven to be quite a formidable force in this computer chess championship.
Yeah, Komodo and Fire, also the Houdini Shredder matchup, which I'm expecting to go Houdini's way based on their performances so far and based on Houdini's sort of reputation that it's established over the last few years as kind of, if we were talking about all the engines in this event here, everybody, all the participants you see there, Stockfish and Komodo are the top tier, but really Stockfish, Komodo, Houdini are kind of the have proven to be pretty much head and shoulders above the rest of machine learning in chess for the last few years. Houdini fell to Komodo in a really exciting game at the TCEC today, but with Shredder, even though it's ranked number 4 according to our kind of pre-tournament opinion, Shredder has underperformed, if anything, so far. So I expect Houdini to take this match. Look at this. We have a French, but we have an Al-Johan Chattard attack. This is going to be some sassiness.
So I played this as white growing up, and I have a good deal of experience in it. So it looks like white just handing black an extra pawn. In fact, you are. After h takes g5, queen takes g5, black is a pawn up. The thing that white gets, though, is very quick development of the pieces, rapid development, which in most of the times, at least in human play, offsets the cost of that pawn because you can make moves like knight to h3, bishop to d3, queen to d2, and castle queenside. And as is typical in many French lines, you always have to be careful before playing c7 to c5 because the knight can invade the d6 square via b5. So this is an actual opening. It's not just something that was made up in this game, but white seeks activity as a form of compensation.
What is the most popular theoretical approach to the Al-Johan Chattard attack? So after 6h4, Houdini obviously went all in, and he's accepting the gambit. But is that normally what you would see at your level as a grandmaster, or what would black play here after move 6h4?
Yeah, after h4, you can also play a6 and play a little more slowly, trying to eventually get in c5 and not open the h file. Okay. Because in many ways, the pawn on h4, if the position is not open, yeah, you can try to go h5 and h6, but it's really not that easy to launch a particularly large attack or to pressurize the black setup. And of course, as is usual, black is trying to get that c5 in quickly, knight c6, hit the center. So both of these options are quite standard, both accepting the gambit by taking the pawn on g5, or ignoring it altogether and playing for the typical c5. So,
okay. What'll be interesting is if this game turns into exactly the kind of one that Shredder's known for. Shredder is a household name, and what has Shredder been known for? As a very aggressive attacking engine, right? That was kind of its thing when it burst onto the scene. Am I right to say that, Robert?
yeah, absolutely.
And so with Shredder going for this type of opening, even without the opening book, is really not that big of a surprise because it's a really aggressive opportunity for White. And with Houdini accepting the gambit without its opening book, rather than a move like a6, I'll be curious to see if the prediction I already made that I think Houdini's going to win this match ends up being wrong, because to me, this is exactly the kind of game that Shredder would want as White against any of the engines in the field today, right? This type of attacking game here with the Al-Johan Chittard attack. What about as Black? As Black, we've got another e4, e5 game. This time it was a Philidor. That's a fun opening.
That's unexpected, honestly.
Unexpected. Houdini doesn't go for the sharpest variations against 6 bishop e7, which tend to occur with the move bishop f4 here on move 6, everybody. The more positional approach with g3, Houdini's style. Houdini often trying to play Komodo-style chess, if that's a fair thing to say. Houdini likes to kind of copy Komodo. So the positional chess more than ultra-aggressive stuff there from Houdini. All right. All games are officially started, Robert. The second game between Fire and Komodo is an h6 Najdorf Sicilian. What? This is going to be interesting. And then, of course, we have the final two games of the round 3, which is Stockfish versus Chiron and Chiron versus Stockfish. So many flavors to choose from. Where should we go?
I think let's go back to Fizbo and Boot, not because of the name Fizbo, but because the position is actually quite interesting. It looks like Fizbo with White has a rook for knight and 2 pawns, and right now the opportunity to trade queens if it so chooses. So pretty interesting setup, but I think that Black is completely fine. Firstly, knight and 2 pawns already is enough to compensate for a rook, but in the current position, it's 2 central pawns. Well, C pawn is not central, but close enough. It's a protected D5 pawn as C6 comes next. And if you don't trade the queens for White, and the queens have just been traded, there was no way to make any progress, at least not that I could see. So now after the queen trade, I think White would like to try to trade a pair of rooks and then try to infiltrate on the back rank. So after rook takes e7 here, rook f1 maybe, and try to get around. But it looks to me like Black is doing more than fine.
Yeah, I agree. And one of the, well, I guess maybe a move like h6 would be better for rook f1. You'd want to play g6 so that you could meet rook f8 with king g7 and hold the f7 square. But you're right. And again, I think you offered again another instructive nugget for our fans without even trying to, which is just that, typically if you're up the exchange in an endgame like this and your opponent has even 1 pawn or 2 pawns for it, your advantage or your opportunity, let's say, to flex the muscles of your rook over the knight, the chances of that go up usually if the other rooks are traded, because now that you've eliminated your opponent's only chance to move like your rook, when you get those things that rooks are known for, like dominance of the 7th rank, or like helping a passed pawn advance really, really quickly, or getting behind a passed pawn, your rook can't be challenged in the same way, right? So it's a strategy that, there are certainly exceptions too, but usually if White has a chance to kind of use the exchange and its advantages, it'll be if the rooks are traded. Black would like to keep the rooks on the board, play c6 and rook d7, and probably try to run the d-pawn with the help of the knight, and make these other 2 rooks sort of feel like a little bit of bystanders, because White has so many pawns to deal with here. Black has 4 of them versus 2. So would that be a fair kind of addition to what you were saying there, buddy? And yes, indeed, Black did play g6, as I was saying, king g7, as far as why White would like to trade the rooks, but why Black is just not going to allow that?
Yeah, you summed it up perfectly. And I'm sorry to take us away from this game because, it is kind of getting down to the wire over there. But in the game with Stockfish as White against Chiron, it's a bit of a deja vu. This opening has been played. Yeah. And we saw Stockfish won a pretty easy game against...
It was Boot. It was Boot in round 1. Boot didn't have a good opening book either, a repertoire either.
Yeah, so we saw Stockfish win this exact opening against Boot, and now it's been replayed here at bishop g5 as we saw.
And it's,
So
it's
either
the exact same line.
So either Chiron is going to play knight f6 here and show us some kind of improvement, or play f6 again and just get a bad position. I don't understand this. I mean, there is no opening book, so they're figuring it out kind of without the resources coming into the game. But, I mean, Danny, this is just seems like a bad choice.
Agreed totally. And for those of you who are now Chiron officially playing exactly how Boot did, and he's probably going to learn the exact same lesson that Stockfish gave Boot. But to remind you, the opening was this Tarrasch where Black chose the gambit line of giving up the d5 pawn by taking c5, despite Robert and I saying that theory is either d4 here for Black or knight f6. At the very least, if you play knight f6 and maybe White eventually wins the d5 pawn, White has had to give up the bishop here for the knight. So these are the things that you sort of expect Black to play for if you're going to play these. But by the way, I mean, at the highest levels, the Tarrasch is probably not the best opening anyway, right? I mean, not to play consistently. So even if the opening theory was there for both sides, it's an interesting and sort of questionable choice by Chiron and Boot as Black. And Stockfish is sort of benefiting from two back-to-back games where he's just winning against these lower-level engines right out of the opening. I mean,
yeah, it's a very strange decision, but something we'll definitely keep an eye on, and perhaps it will kind of unfold in the same exact way as bishop takes e3 was just played. So that is repeating that earlier game. Very strange decision in my estimation, but also we're getting things are heating up in the Houdini game as Black against Shredder. So Shredder White, Houdini Black. We see Houdini's king on d8. And that is not something you typically like to see. You want to see your rooks connected. But again, Black is currently up a pawn in that game that was sacrificed early on. And what White is currently trying to do is force Black into playing a move like g6. So Rook g3 was played.
G6.
And hoping,
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
As you were about to say, once the g pawn moves, the knight hops into f6 and further restricts Black's pieces and is just a dominant outpost position. So, Rook g8, the idea would be to go bishop d3, followed by bishop h7. But as we're pointing out, that it's very difficult for Black to actually prevent that knight from coming into the game.
And I think you're anticipating what Shredder's going to play in this line well. As you said yourself, this is a opening that's been a part of your repertoire for a long time, the Al-Johan Chatard attack, for those of you who don't know how this game started or maybe just joined us. I think that's super interesting because this is exactly the one type of game where I feel Shredder can still be stronger than, let's say, those top three engines in the world, right? And he may not be as strong as them in these positions, but if there's any chance there you see Shredder number 4 to beat the likes of Houdini, Komodo, and Stockfish, it's going to be in these ultra-aggressive, double-edged type of positions where the developers of Shredder have always been sort of some of the leading machine intelligence innovators. So I really like this. And I think Shredder might get him. This is going to be a super crazy game. And we got to keep our eye on this one. We'll come right back to it. The match that I said I wanted to focus on, I want to go back to it because it's moving along. Ansex and Gaul in the game where Ansex is white. Looks like we're kind of just headed toward simplification, especially after this move Rook A1. So maybe this game isn't going to be as exciting as we thought. Or maybe Ansex and Ghul are, as I predicted, it would be a close match. Maybe that'll give us 2 draws, right? Given that they're both kind of new, sexy kids on the block. Okay, but Ansex looks like he's doing okay in this one as Black, though, Robert. I mean, it's sort of equal, but I guess instinctively I prefer Black here. What are your thoughts, despite White having the 3-on-2 majority? What do you think about this position here?
Yeah, I would slightly prefer to have Black just because, once e4 comes, you're gaining some space. And yes, there's a queenside majority for White, but it's pretty hard to move forward. And even if it does move forward, you're not attacking pieces in the process. So it's nice to have the opportunity to go like e4 with the tempo and then maybe think about e3 and breaking open the structure. But that said, it should be a very easy draw. There's nothing really to worry about for either side. Just the king comes to the center, rook will come to d8. It's the only open file for the time being, and that should solidify the equality in the position. So
super interesting. Want to remind all the viewers who are with us on whether you're on Twitch TV/chess or Chess.com TV. We say this a lot during the speed chess matches, and it's often really hard to try to guess the moves of the best human players in faster time controls. But you can log on to Chess.com and play Guess the Move by just following the games yourself directly. And, of course, you can log in as Robert and I attempt to stay up with 10 games going on at once, which is kind of tricky. If you want to follow a different game than us, just log on to Chess.com's live server, click on the little binoculars events tab, and choose your own flavor. Let's go back to Fizbo. Fizbo and Boot, man. Look at this game. Boot has got the rook where we said he wanted it, behind the pawns, with the knight kind of helping. And I continue to think that Black is doing okay here, though Stockfish's evaluation, our cloud analysis, says that White is a little better here. Slightly better at about plus 0.25 to 0.4, ranging in there. Why do you think that is, Robert?
I would say that White is better just because Black can't really make any progress. But at the same time, White's not making any progress either, because where is the progress to be made? What's your plan? The king on h6 is perfectly fine. Can always drop back to g7. If the rook leaves f8 or e8, Black can always choose to bring the rook on e7 or f7 and use the open files there. So I think the game is just equal. And you see even in the brief look at the evaluation there, a little cursory glance, like it's just repeating moves. It's like rook c7, rook back and forth. I mean, these options are not exactly inspiring much confidence in a win. But in the other game between Fizbo and Boot, where Boot is white, that game is actually really interesting now, where Black has a knight on d4, which normally is a great outpost square, but there's a bishop on c3 putting pressure on it. At some point, White would like to go f4 to kick that bishop off the diagonal and the protection of the square. But, Black has the slightly safer king, and this knight c2 move that was just played is an interesting shot. Wow.
Yeah, all of a sudden, Boot has some things to figure out. Look at that evaluation shift. And Stockfish wasn't sure about it either. Stockfish doesn't seem to be sure overall in this position. Of course, it's trying to evaluate things very quickly, and usually it needs a little bit of time. But I was just about to wonder if Black didn't go for something like this. Maybe there were threats of bishop takes g6 or something at some point, sacrificing the bishop and launching an attack. That's obviously my human bias toward what I want to play. But it looks like that's not going to be an issue, because the forced transition means we're headed to an endgame where suddenly I like Fizbo, despite all the criticism of Fizbo. That knight on the edge, the knight on the rim is grim. Black has the bishop pair. Has Fizbo gotten out of the worst here?
Absolutely. After bishop d4 check, the king is forced to h1 and pretty much permanently forced into the corner.
Yeah.
In which case, that means that White's rook is never leaving that last rank. So, wow, this is
I wonder if rook e1. I mean, I know we're humans now going back to criticizing Indians, but I wonder if rook e1 was a blunder in view of knight to c2. I wonder if he didn't see it, or if what Boot, not being a human, but there I go again. What am I doing again? Let me read the word. I'm anthropomorphizing. You're welcome, world.
This looks really bad for White. I would not be surprised if White's already lost. Stockfish is giving it the fluctuating evaluation between something like 0.8. And
if Fizbo wins this game, are you going to take back what you said about his Caro-Kann?
Absolutely not. No. Just because Boot made some mistakes. I was going to make a boot and rally joke, but I don't know.
He needs to boot and rally. No, you did make a boot and rally joke. By saying you were going to make a boot and rally joke, you did. All right.
Yeah, I couched it in a little bit of a question. But
the game I really want to stay focused on is Deep Shredder's attack against Houdini. This game is getting wacky, wet, and wild here. White has won back the material and dominating on the king side. But Houdini managed to walk that king all the way to a safe square finally on a7. So give us your Al-Johan Chattard experience of what you know about this structure and type of position. What do you feel is going on here?
Well, Black is still up a pawn, which is, kind of par for the course in this opening. But what I do like for Black is, as you mentioned, the king has run all the way over to a7, which is actually a pretty big plus for Black, because the king is no longer under threat. There's still going to be a bit of suffocation in the position where, look at the rook on h8, it can't move anywhere. Mm-hmm. At some point, as we just saw, Black is moving this h pawn up the board. I was about to say that, and now I see that it's happened. You use that pawn as a distraction, as a decoy. You hope that it preoccupies White's pieces, and that maybe you can put pressure on the e5 pawn. Otherwise, you can just get your pieces out by perhaps an eventual queen maneuver to d8 to b6, applying pressure on the queen side. Note that all of White's pieces are on the king side, which means a quick counterattack over there on the queen side could be disastrous for white. So right now, I think that black still has nothing really to do. It's kind of just moving back and forth. But just things to keep in mind are a little bit of retribution over on the queen side of the board.
Okay. Fire in Komodo. Fire down below. Fire the fire-breathing dragon. Hey, that's how we combine fire and Komodo there. What have we got here? We've got another positional affair for white. For Komodo when he has the white pieces. Playing against this isolated d5 pawn will be his goals. But when Komodo has the black pieces against fire, we've got some weirdness. What exactly is going on here? The Sicilian that we had to start. Oh, we had our first open Sicilian and we missed it. We got to back up and. Oh no, that's right. We mentioned that we had this h6 with bishop e3 Najdorf here, and we ended up getting really our first sort of mainline Najdorf theory once again, despite not having opening books. We have what was a very theoretical Najdorf there for a little while.
Yeah, so, we did get a Sicilian. It's all about playing for this d5 square, and eventually black put the bishop on g5 and traded it, and that's why you see the weird double pawns. I like white. I think that black is a bit frozen, and that white at some point should consider trading the light square bishops, trying to use the d-file. The really big nuisance, though, is that with his black pawn on a4, you've permanently prevented white from going b3, which means that if the bishops are indeed traded, the c4 square is permanently black's to use. So I think that black is doing okay.
Okay. Well, if he's frozen, maybe he just needs to let it go.
That was nice, Elsa.
Thank you. Shout out real quick to EU Flash, alt who just subscribed to our Twitch channel. Thank you, sir. Really appreciate the subscription. Thank you, EU Flash _alt. I'm not sure if that's like a gamer name. _alt is for ultimate, or if you're just, trying to constantly reboot your PC. Don't know. But thank you either way for subscribing. All right, now black is organizing the breakthrough with d5. This is sort of a common positional Sicilian push that's instructive, right? Because this square, as you highlighted, let's just say if we could just do anything if we were white and we could just take off the light square bishops and get full dominance of the d5 square, then white is in complete control of these types of Sicilians, with the d6 pawn also being very weak. So moves like rook d8 there's absolutely no hidden intentions. Black wants to do everything he can to just bust through and change the pawn structure, eliminating both the d6 pawn weakness and the d5 square at the same time, right? So it looks like Komodo's going to get that. Why are we not just super thrilled to play d5 here for black?
I would say the drawback of playing d5 is that if you open the d-file too soon and white just controls it, right, then you can infiltrate along it, right? So if you go d5 and I capture and then can just quickly maneuver my pieces along the d-file, it could prove to be...
That's a great point, and I think that's probably why we saw this move bishop b3 by Komodo. Is he trying to control the d1 square before he plays d5 to prevent that sort of quick access? I guess he still would have to worry about even moves like bishop d1, as weird as that. Anything that gets rid of the control there would allow white to eventually go to work on the d-file. You have this pawn on f6, right, Robert? This is different than other Sicilians. With this 7th rank already exposed, black always has to be worried about opening up the center because of the king there on g7.
Danny, I'm going to have to cut you off about this game because we have to go to Ansax as white against Gaul.
There.
We left Ansax hanging for a while, and that was our kind of matchup to see at the beginning. But all of a sudden, things got really crazy, even though it looked like it was just heading for a draw. Somehow, Ansax got 2 minors for a rook, and then eventually sacrificed the knight for a lot of checks and an open king.
Well, let's back up at the end of round 3 here, everybody, and if you stick with us for the rest of the show, we promise to review this Ansax Ghul game and see exactly what happened here. But the question is, can he win this? I think we're just going to have to see a bailout for a draw, right? The c pawn is just too strong.
Exactly. Unless there's a way to get a check behind the pawn and then be able to move your pawns. But no, you're not in time because the queen will always go to d2 or d1. And yeah, it should be a draw here for sure. So this game is a draw despite the craziness that ensued. And Fizbo is completely winning with black against boot, and is now also winning with white against boot. So Consider that my apology. Recognizing that you are winning your games is my form of apology to Fizbo.
Wow. Fizbo just flipped the scripto, okay? And Cam the Clown is proud. But is this... What is this now? We should know the answer to this via table base, but this is...
This is a draw, I think. The pawn is getting scooped up.
I know, but it's one of those ones where the knight's in the corner. I think this is winning for white based on...
Yeah, the knight's got kicked around.
I'm almost positive that this is a theoretical win. Stockfish can't make up his mind with the evaluation bar. And apparently neither can the players. Okay, now for sure it's a draw.
Okay, so they're definitely in time trouble as well, but okay, It's just table base, right? If it was winning, they would see it instantly and it would be a done deal. Wait.
It was winning. Oh my God, how instructive was that? Look at that. He had to play that line, Robert, because after the brilliant rook to c2, it put him in zugzwang, knight e3, and then rook e2. Everybody, the knight could not go to c4 or g4 for check because the king would move with a discovery and win the knight. So that was actually winning the entire time for white. How fascinating is that?
That is the game of the day, probably.
That was mind-blowing. Wow.
And it shows you that the engine doesn't always know right away. It's hard to evaluate. As we saw, Stockfish was trying to process it very quickly and couldn't get to the proper evaluation. So Fizbo wins 2 games.
Fizbo goes 2-0 against Boot.
I am.
You're speechless. Well, and again, no, this is the underdog story we wanted. That kid who was bullied in high school, he's a late bloomer, and Boot just got a taste of his own medicine with some maple syrup. That's what I'm talking about.
Well, we have another result. I have to get away from Fizbo's wins.
Houdini comes back and takes down Shredder. That's what you're saying, right?
Yep.
What in the world happened here? Because this was my prediction of... This is the kind of game, if Shredder has any chance against the top 3 big guys, it's in games like this. Where exactly the attack goes wrong for white, I don't know. I'm going through it now. But I think if we go back to that critical moment we talked about where bishop d3 was played, knight took on d4, that's where we left the game. But Houdini had this idea of c5 and then running the king all the way to the safe haven on a7, and just this sort of deep plan by Houdini got black out of the woods, and he was eventually able to work his way out. By the way, it looks like black kind of went for your plan of launching attacking chances on the king side to eventually really flip the script there on Shredder.
Yeah, it definitely was necessary. Otherwise, your play is completely stifled and you're just getting suffocated. So necessary to do something over on that side of the board, but looks like it worked out. And it's actually instructive based on the opening that white did not have to go bishop d3 to h7. You could have protected the d4 pawn before developing that bishop. So that might be something to keep in mind to look at.
But Houdini wins again. Houdini has now beaten Komodo in both. Houdini has now beaten Shredder in both games.
This has been a crazy round. We're just saying how black has been winning many games, and we see a bunch of 2-0s already.
Wow. Houdini takes down Shredder on the black side of a really sharp position, and then he puts the Houdini hurt, as they say, the positional hurt. This is sort of more vintage Houdini with the G3 approach in this line. Kind of positional chess all the way here by white. Eventually launches this big kingside pawn storm. Interesting stuff. And eventually, what does he do? He goes on to win in a crushing attack.
Yeah, wow. Just
brings the knight to f6, and that's all she wrote. Just wins the exchange and then goes to town.
No, and a very impressive performance there by Houdini. Shredder was no match in this one, but also Ansax and Gaul drew both their games.
Okay.
So Ansax has 6 draws in the day. And that leaves us with 2 matches left: Komodo versus Fire and Stockfish versus Chiron. And all four of those games are still going. I would say in Stockfish white, Chiron black. Stockfish looks to be in the driver's seat because Chiron's king is very, very exposed. And so that looks to be like it should be a win. And let's see, the material count is also white's going to be up a pawn in the next few seconds. So that is looking just totally won for Stockfish.
The h3 pawn is falling, as well as tactics on the g file. If the king touches down, then the rook can flip to g3. So, yeah, this looks straightforward. What about the game where Stockfish is black? He's up the exchange, but will it be enough? Probably it will.
Yeah, just because it's an exchange, it's a pure exchange. So white doesn't have a pawn for it. The bishop on e5 is currently under attack. Could get a little difficult to defend all the pawns, but at the same time, rook g7 check, king f5, and a5 and c and f6 are not that simple to protect simultaneously either. So, in fact, rook g5 check is to be considered soon as well.
Now it's a real problem. This move, king f5, everybody, after the bishop defends itself, rook g5 will force a trade of rooks. So that means white may have to play rook e7. But then everybody's frozen, right? Rook e7, like everybody's guarding each other, hoping to hold on to the f6 pawn. You might even still see rook g5 and get this h pawn pushing.
Yeah, you can also go like rook h4 to try to bring the rook to e4, and then your h, like you said, h pawn can start rolling down the board. So, it should be a win for black.
All right, so if Stockfish is able to win both his game as white, which he seems to be moments away from doing so, and find a way to turn on the technique here as black, the question is, once again, can Komodo keep pace? He's in a positional grind against Fire here as white. I like Komodo's chances in this game, especially with Fire's king being kind of wide open here. That queen is sort of eyeing the g6 pawn. And he's also up the exchange as black, so it looks like Komodo is on pace to also potentially take a 2-0 score as we come to the end of day one here.
Yeah, Komodo is a great position, and once again, it's this isolated D pawn when Komodo has the white pieces, and with the black pieces, Komodo is up in exchange. So, it's going to be another 2-0 performance. It's shocking that this is the round they all saved up their energy for blanking their opponent, but Komodo very impressive with the white pieces especially, and just I don't know why they keep doing this isolated pawn thing. I really am curious. I would love to speak to someone more familiar with how engines, kind of the processing. And how
I'd be curious to know about the French thing too, right? I mean, the isolated pawn thing and the ultra-aggressive approach by black against d4. Have you noticed that we've had several Tarashes, several really aggressive approaches from black against d4, right? Very few like Slavs or traditional QGDs. Am I right about that?
Yep. No, you're absolutely
right. So
right.
it's an interesting dynamic, whereas maybe the engines, because the engines are designed in a rapid time control to be aggressive, perhaps they're playing for positions that allow these positional weaknesses like the d5 pawn. Komodo's struggling a little bit here under time pressure to find a concrete plan, though, and I'm starting to think that maybe he doesn't have as much as we first thought. Where's the concrete move here coming for white?
Yeah, there might not be anything concrete because there is compensation, or I should say counterplay along the f file. The bishop on f2 is more or less a big pawn for the time being. So unless somehow that bishop can find its way to d4, for example, it's really just not doing much. So it looks like both sides are shuffling around.
Yep. Shuffling as Stockfish is doing anything but here. He's about to play the move rook to g3, it looks like, or even, I guess, just king g1. He can escape the checks this way, everybody, because after king h2, queen h4 check is no longer possible due to rook h3. So Stockfish is about to beat, and here it comes, rook h3. Stockfish is about to beat Chiron with white. We're going to leave that one as it is and move on to Stockfish's game here as black. Also looking like he's doing nothing but making progress here. The f-pawn is sort of irritating for black in these kind of games. You can't just move the rook and run around and try to create a mating net or something against the king because you have to worry about the f-pawn. But black's idea is going to be sort of a balance of poking at the a-pawn, keeping an eye on the f-pawn, and then using the dominant position of the h-pawn, the active king, and the rook on the fourth rank to kind of push white over the edge where white just has too many things to worry about. And it looks like that's what he's doing here. Now he activates the king to e4. If this rook leaves the third rank, Robert, rook a3 comes in. Oh, and that's
Yep.
actually that's what happened. Yep.
And after rook c7, okay, when rook e7, let's say the rook c7, just rook takes f6,
Yeah.
the bit is pinned on c3. So now,
It's just over.
yeah, now it's definitely over. Rook c7, still f6 is hanging.
Even here, you can take on f6 after rook d3.
Yep. And then the pin is permanent, so it's completely lost.
Yeah. Table bases equal God. Got to give Rip Hostile a shout out for clipping that rook versus knight win by Fizbo over Boot. That was. I think it had us more shocked than anything else we've seen today, right? Where Fizbo clearly had that thing on lock because of the table base. So, in all fairness, right? But to see how counterintuitive that was for human beings, Robert, that knight. I mean, at one point you heard me say it. Okay, this is a draw now, right? Because the king got off the edge of the board. I just assumed it was a draw, but then what happened? That knight never made its way back. So that was a fascinating game of the day, and thank you, RAP Hostile, for clipping that on our Twitch channel.
Whoa, and Komodo is just blitzing out a win against Fire. That was also pretty cool. It was rook against bishop and 2 pawns, but the king was trapped in the H file. So Black went on to win the bishop, and now is up quite a lot of material and just delivered checkmate. So that was pretty crazy by Komodo.
Instantaneous stuff there. Let's back up and see what you were saying, where he has the bishop for the pawns there, but just puts on the hurt. What did he eventually do here? We talked a lot about the positional aspects of this one, and Black wanting to break with d5, and it looks like finally on move 46, Black did make the break based on tactics after the pawn takes queen b8, and there's all kinds of weird threats here.
Yeah, the queen on g3 was not in a great position.
Yep.
And the on f3 as
e4.
well.
Yep. So White gave up the exchange, but then Komodo was able to grind it down with the extra rook versus the bishop. Okay, well, amazing technique that the computers show, and they look very much like just super strong humans at certain points, and then other moments they're making decisions that no strong human could ever make, especially not in that amount of time, and just fascinating to see. So Komodo takes down Fire as Black, but he's not able to win as White, as they've now officially agreed to a draw via repetition. What happened here?
Yeah, it looks like Black was barely able to escape just because White's king is also quite vulnerable. So
Yeah.
Despite having a queen on d5 and a bishop on d4 and looking like a menacing attack, the issue is that you just don't have enough pieces left. And without getting the rook into the game, Black is able to hold because of the threats along the f-file. So an interesting draw there. And I was going to say, of all the matches, there have been a couple 1-1 matches, but just with all draws. Has there ever been a match? I don't think there's been a match as far where White has won both games. Both sides have won with the white pieces. So
not today so far, right? Yeah, we haven't had a tied match via decisive results yet.
Yeah,
Stockfish takes down Sean. Yeah,
because when you watch the World Cup or some kind of match play amongst approximately level opponents, even if one side is slightly stronger, you will see them splitting games. Winning with White, losing with Black. But here
right.
It's has not been the case.
Well, officially all games in round 3 have ended, Robert, which means we get to end our show and take a break before we come back for tomorrow. Still a lot of you with us who have been enjoying the show all day. We really appreciate your support and tuning in for the first ever Chess.com Computer Chess Championship. Day 1 comes to an end. There, as I'm showing you day 3's calendar. Day 1 is now in the books. This is what we just saw. At the end of day 1, Stockfish is in the lead, and we will have results and standings updated for you in the show tomorrow as Robert and I join you. Here is the day 2 schedule. We start out with Fizbo and Chiron. Fizbo, that sneaky guy, that underdog from high school, making a comeback despite Robert Hess's predictions. So he'll take on Chiron first. Then we have Fire and Ghul, Shredder and Boot, Komodo Houdini. That's a matchup I'm looking forward to. Komodo and Houdini. And then we've got Stockfish and Ansac. So, and then, of course, we've got much more. Robert, any final words as we have the schedule here for everyone to implant in their heads and join us tomorrow?
Well, I'm still caught speechless because of Fizbo. That was just totally unpredictable for me. I'm still thinking of Modern Family and how Fizbo is ridiculed there, but, kind of comes to bring people together at the end. So maybe it's the Fizbo show, and I'm just living in Fizbo's world. But more importantly, I am curious to see if Ansax can actually pull some wins together, because today we saw Ansax draw all 6 games. Has not lost a game, but has also not won. So it'll be really fascinating to see if Ansax can actually beat up on some of the, I don't want to call it lesser competition, but kind of the more vulnerable engines here. And at the end of the day, it's going to be a match between the big guns, and we'll see if the top engines will reign supreme in this 10-engine competition.
Well, you called yourself out when you said you're shocked by Fizbo, and so I got to show you this night ending win by Fizbo one more time for all the fans. If you somehow missed this moment had us on the edge of our seat. After a super interesting game to begin with, and sort of a fascinating eventual outplaying of Black, despite Black having 2 pawns for the exchange, we reached this point where Black took the pawn on g7 with check, and we initially thought maybe it would be a win, because normally when you have the king and knight in the corner like this, the king and rook can find a way to coordinate. Theoretically, if you don't know this, king and knight is a theoretical draw against king and rook, except for a few very specific, unique positions, and it turned out this was one of them. What had me and Robert shocked was that after Black seemed to have gotten out of the woods here, look at this position with the knight on b6 and then the knight on a4, Robert, we're thinking, okay, this has to be a draw now, because, again, we're no longer in the corner, right, where the king and the knight are trapped in a mating net. But this was a theoretical win. Moves like rook to b2 on move 84, Robert, guarding e2, guarding b5, is just like literally fascinating. And somehow White manages to corral this knight with the final blow, rook e2. Remember, everyone, the knight was trapped here after knight f1, king f4 check. But even if the knight had moved to g4, it would have lost itself with discovered check or c4. So, sorry, I'm probably going to go over that one a few more times before it's all said and done, Robert, because that was worth the day for me right there. And I'll see you tomorrow.
Yeah, Dan, it's a great show, and that was really an epic performance, game of the day. But it left us a lot to learn. So tomorrow will be another good experience.
Until then.